Yeah, I mean, it's just Luke Ford and the dangers of evil. And he's an introvert, incel or whatever. And when he comes out on the internet, he has this, like the dark side of his subconscious becomes conscious. I mean, to me, it's obvious. It's what happens. It's what's happening to you on the same way. But your unconscious, your subconscious is different than Gandalf's subconscious.
Logic and science dictate that not only consciousness doesn't exist, consciousness is in fact scientifically impossible. And like, yes, it is going to involve math and calculus and science and computer programming. I'm sorry. And that have different implications of the process. What's the connection between the levels of a person's soul and how it reincarnates?
But I'm not going to spur on the issue because I'm not a woman. It's not my issue.
About how one day you're going to fulfill the Canadian dream or the American dream. So you watch Seinfeld and say, oh, I could do it. I'm going to go out tomorrow and go to work and have a great day, and I'm going to be successful. And one day I'm going to have my own apartment. I'm going to have my own parties with my own friends over, and I'm going to have my own possessions. I'm going to see things that I want and just buy them.
Yeah, but that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of yours.
Hello and welcome back to Week in Review with the one and only Doooovid. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today. I thought it might have been an issue with the stream, but it looks like it was saved just in time. Woohoo! Over to you, Doooovid, for the introductions. Thank you so much for being with us here this evening.
Okay, good to be back. Hopefully this is working. I guess we'll see in a second once the delay catches up. So yeah, it sounds like it's working. So it looks like it was I don't know if it was an exciting week. I mean, I just had that one debate on Friday with Cultural Thug, which I guess relative to a debate went relatively well. Although I think I'm not going to end up working with Politically Provoked. I left their Discord. I didn't get in any arguments with anybody, but it just looked like it was going nowhere. I saw Jennifer didn't even want to join their Discord, and she was probably right that kept on getting shut down. Like, I want to work together with people and organize debates, but it's hard to find people to work together with, and like infotainment, Jerry Springer type content. I need more intellectual stuff and research, and I'm not that much into politics either. So like I just hopped on relatively for the Jewish question, and basically because of Norvin that I got involved with that almost exclusively because Norvin mentioned me and invited me to it. I'd never even heard of their program before, but after like a week in their Discord, it just looked like it was going nowhere. So people could see, I'll share the links, people could see the debate with Cultural Thug if that people find that interesting. So it was, I guess, a good week of research, some interesting things going on. I guess the most interesting is possibly Luke Ford is returning to Australia. That may or may not be the case. He could just be throwing it out there to kind of garner sympathy or see kind of what's waiting for him back in America. Does anyone really want him back? What type of connections or friends does he have, so to say, his Orthodox Jewish friends? That does he even have really Orthodox Jewish friends? Are his Orthodox Jewish friends really waiting for him to come back to LA or Hollywood? And then what does he really have in Australia, saying almost a senior citizen? What would he really have waiting for him in Australia? So he could just be throwing it out there to kind of liven things up, make things more interesting. But that's probably the most significant news this week. There was a lot of various stuff on the internet happening. So we'll talk about debate culture. I think Ralph from Right Reaction in London, Germany. You spoke with him. He had some big streams, more Jewish-based right-wing nationalism. I had my Charles Moskowitz, and God forbid, I mean, I like working with Charles, but he doesn't listen that well, and I'm trying to, God forbid, maybe we'll talk about that more. But I'm trying to express to him some of the ideas that people are expressing to me, and then he's skeptical of me that I'm expressing these ideas that people are expressing to me, and it seems almost like counterproductive. So I'm trying to get him to debate with these other people, and he might not be cut out for it. He might be too old. He might not be good enough with the technology, or whatever. That Brandon Martinez debated Destiny and looked like he had a pretty good result on the Great Replacement. And then Joseph Cohn, Israel Advocacy Movement, did this like hit piece on Brandon Martinez, and it was actually interesting that Brandon Martinez used to be a consultant for Press TV in Iran and a Palestinian activist. So it's interesting, like white nationalism, that he would have got his start as a Palestinian activist and with Press TV in Iran. And he's not the only person who talks with Press TV in Iran that dealt with Kevin Barrett is probably the most regular Press TV. In fact, Kevin Barrett's basically on Press TV Iran once a week. The white convert to Islam that I interviewed on my channel, and E. Michael Jones is occasionally on Press TV. Rodney Martin used to be on Press TV, so that's interesting. Brandon Martinez actually being a correspondent with writer for Press TV, and he's written actually books quite scholarly, politically provokes him. It just seemed a little bit too low IQ for me. I need people like read books and do research. Then I'm not so much into like the infotainment or the laughter. So they might, and also maybe we'll talk about kind of their narrow casting where so I'll do the screen share and we'll look at that. So why don't I start with the chant, and then I'll let Jennifer talk a little bit while I load up some screen shares to talk about. Maybe we'll have some guests, or maybe we'll just cut it short after an hour or so. And Victoria, glad to be back. I'm not sure if Tinkle Tank appears in the chat if he tried my exercises on meditation. If anyone tried those basic exercises on meditation, be interesting to talk about. So, is that you, Jennifer?
Sorry about that. I thought I was muted.
Okay, so last week I did a repeat of one of my favorite Hasidic tunes, and so maybe I was thinking about it, so I'll keep on doing ones that I haven't done yet. I'm pretty sure. So this episode 129. So you've heard over 100 Jewish Hasidic tunes. I'll keep them coming. So I just had to think a little bit. So this is from a Sabbath morning song. It's a Zemiros, which means it's like a poem that has 8 stanzas, and it's unknown authorship. The acrostic of the name is Chaim Yitzchak, and the tune is called Hashem, Chai Hashem Uvorik Suri. Hashem is my life, the blessing, my rock, and it's sung Sabbath morning. It's unknown authorship besides the acrostic that says the name Chaim Yitzchak. It's got a pretty exciting tune. It's not widely sung among Orthodox Jews. This one's more exclusive among Hasidim and Kabbalists. And they're kind of like pleasantry words, a little bit based on Psalm 23, that Hashem is my lights my candle. Praise Hashem. Hashem is my shepherd; I shall not fear. Gives bread to all livelihood, and so the words are basically a compilation of verses from the regular prayer services. So it's got a pretty lively tune. So let me do this chant. Chai Hashem Vivorik Suri B'Hashem Tisal Nafshi Ki Hashem Yoir Nairi B'Eloi Roi Al Roishi Hashem Roi Lo Yexar Al Memenichos Yanagleini Noisein Lechem Lichal Bosar lechem chukim merfeini. Yehi ratzon milfonechu atu Eloi hakedoshi tarog lefunai shilchanechu tidashem shemin roishi mi yitein minichusi lifnei adon hashuloim v'hoisa shalema mitusi echayim v'shuloim. So actually, it's 8 stanzas. So it just repeats, but hopefully with that, just some generic praising of the Lord. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Jennifer while I open up some of the links that I want to share, this week of interesting things I found.
How much time do you need?
2 minutes, maybe.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Great to see all the people in chat already and 14 people watching. Yay. Thanks for the support. Maybe one day I can be larger YouTube channel. Woohoo! All right, what's happening this week? Let's see. This time I got a screenshot of what I lost last week, which were my notes for the show. And this week, the problem is that I basically have no notes for the show because this was on the phone for Uncle's birthday leading up to it, and then I sort of lost track of time, but hopefully there's enough to improvise with, or like Doowovid said, we could just have a short show. But it feels like a lot's happened. It does feel like there's a lot to discuss, especially with Luke. Like you said, what's really keeping him there? If he can still, if his whole life is basically a show, and show in his blog, he can do that anywhere in theory, and I don't think he's doing as much gonzo journalism as back in the day, probably. Next thing, inside jokes, specifically movies from that juicy part of the curve where, before 2000s, where they really started to go downhill. Around the time when they were more using puppets, I think aliens type things, than CGI, when it was just like going full what on the CGI, basically not even giving a shit about plots anymore, or to the point of making the plots shitty on purpose because reasons. Maybe that sells more Coke. I'm not sure. But there's definitely a good cluster of movies that are worth quoting, if only for the reason the movies have gotten so shit in the modern day. So I'll just we'll do a mashup here. And it's one, I'll tell you what the movie is, and then you got to figure out what the other movie is. It's 2 movies mashed up together. So we're going to give you an image. It's a cliche, but it's an image. Willem Dafoe in Boondock Saints. That's the hint. Okay, so other thing that I shared to you, I think, as well, Doowovid, was, did you want to start with your... I can stop here if you're ready to pounce back in.
I got my links ready, but if you want to finish whatever you're talking about.
No, let's do it. I'm sure I can make a better polished version if I have a couple more minutes to just focus.
Okay, yeah, that was part of lack of identity is these cultural identifiers like movies or commonalities, where maybe at some point you would have been able to quote something. Even my mother said she used to train new lawyers with this old movie with.
I think we talked about it a bit with the Seinfeld thing already. You had quite a dissertation there.
Yeah, so just in general that it's unclear what these universal cultural indicators are anymore, and even movies these days are hard to did you see it? Like I mentioned on this channel, a lot of movies, and just like like Hoosiers or something that at some point may have been an American iconic movie that everyone would have known, now like no one's even heard of before. And like when Luke was that this week where Luke Ford was on Politically Provoked, I think it was, but
I don't think so. No,
or that was the week
because I think we
before.
talked about his appearance last week in review.
Yeah, it was a week before, but it's like you're just no one really knew the cultural indicators, and I was mentioning that even to, like the alt right and like frame games and stuff that happened a few years ago. I'm going to share this video from Stephen James where he said politically provoked was like a cryogenic freeze that had been released from 4 years ago, where it's like people hadn't heard of. It was like a repeat of something that happened a few years ago. Someone never seen that before, and then most of the people in politically provoked are just not familiar with that like most of this stuff already happened a few years ago. So it's like trying to come out and be new to people, and maybe new because stuff was censored or just left from the news. So is my screen share working?
Oh, I haven't made it full screen yet. My apologies. I'll do that right now.
So that's usually why I focus
It is
on
working.
science, the Bible, esoteric ideas, timeless type things that like I quote.
Yeah, you called yourself a mystic. Epic. Such the best title. So glad you've finally
like I quote
gone that path, unironically.
Proverbs. B'ni al Talik B'derech Hitam, my son, don't go in the way of the times. That things are ephemeral, and so what might be popular today won't last the tide of the times. So there's certain things like theory from the verse, biblical wisdom, godly wisdom is eternal. So is my screen share working?
It's always been working. It just wasn't the right size, but it's the right size now.
Okay, so here we got Peter Santinello, still in Dearborn, Michigan. And this was pretty incredible. He showed this Islamic charity thing in Dearborn, Michigan, where they have like a 40,000 square foot facility with training programs, food, clothing, all types of stuff. And he gets a tour of it. So, God bless the wonderful program, wonderful, wonderful idea. Zaman, which I probably Arabic, but it means time in Hebrew. So it probably means the same thing. So it was kind of heartwarming to see good things, and I also helping out like new Afghani refugees, but also just people in down out situation. So a good program. I've been sharing Peter Santinello for a while. Here's my debate with Cultural Thug. So it looks like he has his own YouTube channel and propped it up, and so he's already got close to 1,000 views. So if people want to check out my JQ debate with Cultural Thug, there it is on his YouTube channel. If you don't want to go to the alternative networks, if you want, we could talk about that more if it's not or not a big deal. We don't have to. I've been following Lab Roots for a while. So Lab Roots is basically a consortium of technology providers that make lab equipment and sell them, and then they have scientific presentations from various people largely related to how you're working with lab equipment, but a lot of times they have interesting stuff related to the most recent discoveries, and a lot of the most recent discoveries are specific to the lab equipment. So they had a few recent ones on consciousness and the brain. I usually watch their stuff related to COVID-19, but they have all sorts of stuff on like CRISPR, gene editing, molecular biology. And so it's the latest in technology, the type stuff you could purchase for a scientific or medical or research lab. And so they had some stuff on the brain and cognition. They have one on mechanistic models of cognition from perception to navigation to semantic development. I didn't have a chance to watch it yet. They have a debate discussion on can we generate an organizing theory of the brain, which is a lot like the other stuff I watch, but from the actual company that sells lab equipment. Here, I'll share this one. I just watched this one right before the show started. Also, Shalom Samish in the chat. So here was a keynote presentation, current and future directions of the NIH Brain Initiative, the NIH, the National Institute of Health, the U.S. government's financial arm, governmental arm into research. So just read the abstract here. The increasing burden of neurological disorders as our population ages, together with the high personal societal cost of mental and substance use disorders, underscores the need for new ways to intervene and deepen our knowledge of the human brain in health and disease. Not enough is known about the billions of brain cells that communicate via trillions of synapses to make up the circuitry that enable us to perceive, think, feel, and act. Launched in 2003, the Brain Research through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies Brain Initiative supports research revealing how the brain works by developing novel tools and applying innovative techniques to precisely map and observe brain circuits, building on initial successes, and is outlined in the Brain 2.0 ACD report. In its second phase, the Brain Initiative will investigate the large-scale projects that will transform the landscape of potential neurological research. So this is more medical-based and specifically related to the most pertinent thing facing Americans, which would be medical, specifically our aging population and the common neurological disorders that face aging people, as opposed to trying to solve the heart problem of consciousness or models of consciousness. That's more me and Jennifer's interest. But I said the main research arm is not people researching consciousness, but it's medical, usually specific towards curing the most common diseases like dementia. So encourage people to check that out. And if you're in research or something like that, or in university, that would be much more likely that people would be working something like that related than the consciousness stuff me and Jennifer talk about. Here's Luke Ford talking up whether he's ready to move to Sydney, Australia, and he's got his playlist of stuff there. I'm not sure. Like it'd probably be pretty hard for Luke to remake his life in Australia. But who knows? We'll see what it does. It's probably kind of like a gimmick for his, probably some sort of publicity gimmick, or just a way of testing his friends to see who he.
Be careful, because maybe it was a gimmick, and now that he's gonna see you say this, he's gonna just move there to spite you.
Yeah, I doubt it. I mean, it could also be a
Bad joke.
way to. Yeah, I mean, I have no interest in your humor, so you could save your humor for a different stream. But yeah, I mean, he could also be testing his friends, like God forbid, I forget the famous Hollywood executive that used to go into a meeting and then would leave his briefcase with a recorder so he could hear people talk behind his back. So it could just be testing his friends to see who really cares or likes him, that wants to know whether he it's just a way to test his friends on how much they really care or like him. Here's the University of Michigan, my alma mater, and Angel Hall. So Angel is named after a person who had his role in the 1880 Angel Treaty and the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. So someone in Michigan that was a prominent person, but Angel was, God forbid, anti-Chinese. And in 1882, the Immigration Act that excluded Chinese people from moving to America. So if anyone who's ever been to University of Michigan, there's a huge thing called Angels Hall, not like, just like angel, like in Hebrew, Moloch, but Angel being this man's name. And he was anti-Chinese. So the student council is passing a resolution, and they're trying to get the name of Angel Hall changed. So here was Stephen James. Yeah, I guess he's watches this show sometimes. I see him in my chat. I guess he's in London. Kind of cool. He's got a little turtle. First time I actually watched his channel, maybe I checked it back, and he did a little review of the Politically Provoked program. And I guess he has right-wing leanings, but he's not exactly like a white nationalist of any sort. And he was saying like how bad Beardson, who I never even heard before, but I guess he's like Nick Fuentes, American First guy, and James, that they were so just with the ethnic slurs and and the degenerate behavior that he was citing with me and the radical coder, I guess, is I'm not sure if he's homosexual or something, but James was just making the point. Stephen was making the point of how bad, these people character was that that he was siding with me and the radical coder, and he was the one who mentioned it's kind of frozen in time from 4 years ago. So I thought he's kind of got low quality video. Jennifer wasn't so keen on Stephen James, but besides for the hardness of the technology or however he does it, it was interesting commentary, and also had a video on Ralph Maslamani and Joseph Cohn. That was some interesting commentary. Charles Moskowitz's new book on sociology for conservatives is out. So, I'll probably, once he gets me a copy of it, I'll probably have on my channel, and we'll talk about that. Let's see if it will allow me to see the table of contents. So here you got Decline of the American Family, Critical Race Theory, The Grand Conspiracy, 2020 Election, Pandemic, Collective, Effervescence, Transhumanism. So I'll be looking forward to reading that and probably have on my channel to talk about that. Here, Mind Chat, Philip Goff had Sean Carroll, probably the biggest name in popular physics these days, but one of the most popular podcasters on physics. They were talking about consciousness, and Goff is one of the bigger names, probably more philosophy of science and actual like hard neuroscience. And I showed Jennifer. Did you watch his thing on T-Jump? So I mentioned that he'd been on T-Jump. I just saw this in, I guess, the Royal Institute of Philosophy. So I hadn't actually seen that one. So I'll save that for later.
Sorry, who went on Teach?
I was mentioning Philip Goff, and I told you that
Okay.
Philip Goff had been on T-Jump, and I showed you that link from like 9 months ago. I'm not sure if you watched that.
Yeah, I did. Interesting.
So God forbid, this was in the news, like maybe like in terms of psychology, this man turned himself into the cops. He called the FBI, accused of threatening to blow up a synagogue in St. Louis, and he said he called the FBI saying he wanted to blow up God forbid, the Central Reform Synagogue. And he said he heard voices, has schizophrenic disorder, suffers PTSD, anxiety, depression, social anxiety order. And so he hates, God forbid, the Jewish people with rage. And he told the police he should be arrested because he was feeling suicidal and homicidal. God forbid he feels like killing Jews. He told the police department, and I guess they took him in. And so it's interesting. He said, like he called the police to turn himself in because he said he was hearing voices in his head and had an uncontrollable homicidal rage against Jews, God forbid. So, interesting psychology. I have this here. It looks like it's not working anymore. Kathleen Ballou, I guess, was paid $30,000 with Peter Simi to do research on white supremacy for the Charlottesville trial, and they had a document that I went over. And so, kind of like politically provoked and all this stuff that they're always, who are these people? What's the demographics? So I like Kathleen Ballou. If anyone's heard of her, I've been following her for a while. She has the book Bringing the War Home, and I think another book on like white supremacy manual, where she's kind of giving an overview of the landscape in America. So she was paid $30,000 by the prosecutors or maybe the SPLC to write a little amicus brief, like a document to favor the prosecution, and where she goes over kind of the theology or the breakdown of who are these people, what type of groups do they represent. And so, we talk about politically provoked, and I'll pop that up actually. So I'm just showing here, Politically Provoked, who won the debate between me and Cultured Thug. They probably have more votes than this now. Out of the 400 votes, 78% were for Cultured Thug, 14% for Doooovid, 10% draw. So let me put this up just for a second, just to show. The last thing, this was a really good video. In fact, I encourage Jennifer to watch this. This is probably the best video on COVID-19 I've seen in a while. And it was an AI simulation from the molecular level of, I guess, like a billion atoms. And, so if you're looking at the exhalation, so you have, the picometers or nanometers. I think here they've actually the picometers and the levels. And so they had a mathematical method of building it up atom by atom, something similar to AlphaFold, to see how exactly the virus is embedded in mucus and various elements. So you can see like here where a single virus might be embedded in some sort of aerosol droplet and the type things that would combine with it. And this has the most, say they built it up atom by atom, a model of the COVID-19 virus, including the spike protein and the Delta variant, and showing. And so if you looked at a droplet coming, there would be other things in the droplet besides just the virus, and that might cause it to be more transmissible or more spreading. And then there are other studies about like the pH and various things. So pretty interesting. Summit only has 500 views. Rami Amaro, I'm not sure, channel only has 80 some subs. I'm glad I found this video. But if you want to watch one video on COVID-19, especially Jennifer, I would encourage this one, because I said they built up a model using AI. In fact, they said they had 180 megacomputers processing for 14 days to process that. So pretty interesting. So I guess they put my video back on their channel. They thought it was kosher enough for Politically Provoked. So if you look at Politically Provoked, they didn't get that many views. Like they had like some videos like tens or hundreds, and I guess they did interviews, and you could look like Zen Shapiro shows up, like abortion, and they had a few videos with over 1,000. But I guess even to this woman Brittany, her views kind of changed from left to right, or Todd. It's unclear exactly what they're doing, what they're trying to do. And then kind of like Brundlefly, they had Richard Spencer on, and they had Destiny a few times, which has quite a few viewers, and then they started getting right-wing personalities, specifically Richard Spencer, and then their viewership got way up here. You see Richard Spencer, almost 8,000 views, and then I guess they got flooded with Wignats, or however it be referred to, and that's where Norvin came in, and then Norvin, mentioned Doooovid, some rabbi he used to debate, and they've probably been narrowcasted now, where at this point, like their pop on yesterday was basically like all white nationalist, and like and so now they're probably going to go down that rabbit hole. They had Jay Dyer on, who I even asked, like, I guess he said he didn't want to debate me. I wasn't promoting myself, but I guess they needed names to put out there.
Jay Dyer ran for the Hills when he heard your name. Is that correct?
I'm not sure. He probably just was skeptical of the channel or the knowledge level, and it was kind of a mess. And so I said, like, I don't think I'm going to be able to work with these people in terms, like, I want to promote debate. I'm not that much into politics. I tried to show them like the flowing method, or get them to up their IQ or research for better quality debates. But I think they're going to go more down the rabbit hole in terms of talking to right-wing extremists, and be kind of like the Donahue show. So I don't really want any part in that. We're just going to be kind of dumb of, kind of like, the Jerry Springer show or something like that. We're just
Well, I
low
think
quality.
the Zen Shapiro guy was the sort of hint that was going to be the case.
Well, I mean, it was basically Richard Spencer saying, like, I mean, he might be an example of that, but saying that they, like the Kevin Michael Grace and even Luke Ford, who said that, he talks about Richard Spencer, he could get 200 viewers. If he talks about what he wants to talk about, he get 30, 40 viewers, and so it becomes narrow casting, where they could talk about. Certain right, have like Norvin, certain right wing extremist debates between white nationalists and Jews or something like that, and get 100 viewers, get some super chats, or they could have kind of go back to the regular debating smaller issues and get tens of viewers and no super chats. So they're likely to go with the bigger audience, but it's a narrow casting that will probably prevent them from having growth. So like now they want to have like Ryan Dawson and Mike Enoch and Stryker. They're going to have Jolly Heretic this Tuesday. Jay Dyer. So they're basically rehashing the Warski type public space guests, and so that's not the direction I would recommend. They probably would have been better trying to get into more mainstream audience or bigger debates, or trying to up their game for mainstream politics. But it looks like they're going to rehash basically stuff that had already been done a few years ago. And the audience for that, like, although it may up their numbers temporarily, it's not really the audience I want to capitalize on. So I'm probably not going to be working together with them. I wanted a place where I could book people like Jennifer, for debates, or Claire, or interviews, and like I mean, I was happy to work together with to some extent, but I don't want to get back down that rabbit hole again of debating these people. And they weren't really interested in any scholarship, because saying like, I know who these people are. I've been dealing with this for years, and so they'll have to learn the hard way. And but that's fine. So just focus on what I focus on, mainly consciousness, science, spirituality. No news back from Theology Unleashed about Ben Watkins, so we'll see about that. So I guess that's about it. Nothing coming up this week. Charles Moskowitz taking off for Thanksgiving. Hanukkah is coming up, actually. So I think Hanukkah is starting maybe the end of next week. I'm not even sure. I have to look into that. 2 weeks from now, Sunday, Hanukkah. So Hanukkah parties are already starting up, and that's going to be the end of October. So I think that's after. I don't think it's next Sunday, but I think it's like the Monday night after. So look forward to Hanukkah coming up early this year, because of the way the Jewish calendar works, where we lose like 11 days each year, because we have a lunar calendar with 12 months, and then add an extra month. So this will be the last year before the leap year. The next year, this year is actually a leap year, meaning the Hebrew year that started a few months ago. So next year, Hanukkah will be about Christmas time, but this year it actually starts in the end of November. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jennifer. So I'm not sure if we have any guests or anything interesting to say. Maybe we'll just have a relatively short week in review this week.
Sure. I've been hanging out on the Teej server. I can talk about that, or if that's just going to be a bore fest, I can skip it. It is interesting.
You talk about it even though it's boring. I mean, it's your week in review. So like, if you're not going to review,
well, yeah, I'm
the purpose.
I'm
I'm saying,
to some
like,
extent. All right.
I mean, honestly, I couldn't even watch that video you posted. I tried to watch like the first like 10 minutes of it, and I couldn't even follow what they
Oh,
were
I love
talking
it so
about.
much. I don't even
Um,
care if I can't follow. It's like, oh, there's a word I don't know, and there's another word I don't know, and I have faith that I can do the neural net thing. That's why I really love those combos. That's me though. Plus the tedious long chains of internally tedious long chains of logic. Oh yeah.
well, you could try to make it more viewer friendly, like timestamp it or something. And if it's just the conversation that's recorded and
Nah.
didn't even start at the beginning, and it's not clear like the change in topics or what they're talking about, um, if it's just a recording, that started somewhere, and so it's unclear, so it wasn't really intelligible, or it wasn't really gaining anything from watching it, so I couldn't even watch it. But like if you did want to up your content, like obviously time stamping it would be a good start. A table of contents.
Sounds like a someone else job. I was wondering whether reductio ad absurdum is a type of metaphor. And if so, what type of metaphor is it? Caricature? Is a caricature a metaphor? Didn't really
Usually
have an answer.
reductio ad absurdo.
I believe it is reductio or reductio ad absurdum. Forgive me, my Greek's not great. But yeah.
It's a fallacy. Reductio ad
I
absurdum
thought it was a
involves
rhetorical
characterizing
technique.
an opposing argument in such a way that it seems to be ridiculous, or the consequence of a position seems ridiculous. It's basically straw manning. Usually people refer to it as straw manning, but it just means argument to absurdity, where you reduce something usually falsely to something that's absurd, and then therefore your argument is absurd because I've framed it in a way that's absurd. So I think it's the same thing as straw manning.
Mm-hmm. So is that a metaphor? Is a straw man a metaphor? So, just wondering. That's all.
If you want, maybe just before you continue your review, just so we can clarify it, and was looking on the internet, a straw man is an attempt to discredit someone's argument by actually attacking and defeating something else than the opponent never actually argue it at all. A reductio absurdum isn't a logical fallacy at all, but rather a valid method of demonstrating that
Yeah.
the other side's argument doesn't work, that is done taking that argument its natural conclusion and showing that it leads to some absurd outcome if correct. So some people have reduction ad absurdum as some sort of fallacy similar to straw manning, but like straw manning is a pure fallacy where you just claim that this is what the other person's saying, but it's not really what the other person's saying. Reductio ad absurdum is reducing to saying like basically this is what you're saying, and that's absurd. And I guess it could also be considered a logical fallacy, but it could also be considered logically valid, where you try to like give a metaphor or a parallel to what the person's saying, or some sort of conclusion. Like if this is the nature of your logic, then your logic should reduce to this conclusion, and that conclusion is absurd. Therefore your argument is absurd.
Flogic. Not sure if I should ban this person in the chat.
Oh, God forbid. No, I mean, if someone's talking about this mass casualty event and someone just plowed through, was that what you're talking? Based retard?
Yeah, I'm not sure what they're talking about.
It's a breaking news story. I just saw that, God forbid, there was a parade in Wisconsin and someone just plowed a car through it, and possibly a mass casualty event, God forbid. In Israel today, there was also, God forbid, pretty bad day in Israel. There was, 2 terror attacks. Someone opened gunfire, killing 1 person, injuring 4. And then there was a stabbing attack, and there's been riots all over Israel. So it could be that Israel's escalating towards another spat of violence. So I guess a Christmas parade. I don't know why they're having a Christmas parade like a full month before Christmas, but they were. And so, okay, but I mean, it doesn't have too much to do with week in review. I mentioned that case of the person hearing voices in his head who turned himself into the police related to anti-Semitism. But, God forbid, it's a state of the times. And I was going to mention, you also kind of relate to politically provoked that, people are lining up for the battle, like Bhagavita, Armageddon, and people are kind of like Kyle Rittenhouse, the verdict, and like people are all happy about that. And so there is this tendency for people to be like, I've picking a side, and then the dissonance is just like my side's gonna win. And then, God forbid, there'll start being casualties. And as if you've been on the war front, sometimes depending on the personality, casualties are disheartening. They're discerning to people, causing people to lose question their side. But other times there's well, I'm not dead yet. So even though people on my side died, that the dissonance to the level of when people start fearing. But that's what I saw kind of in the politically provoked is people are ready for battle. They're not really interested in education, like even related to the history of the alt-right, the history of internet blood sports. People don't even care about the history of like who are these people, what's the history of these ideas, what things are they repeating. They're just picking sides and preparing for battle, and that's probably most related to human nature. So God forbid, as society falls, as people get more dug into one side or the other, God forbid, violence. And I always harp on, even Jennifer. It's almost irritating to me because I interpret it as her kind of. I take an extreme interpretation of laughter to almost be promoting violence.
I really wish you would understand that it's how I've managed to teach people more effectively. It is a rhetorical technique. You are the one being emotional here, not me.
Well, whether emotional or not, but I see that in the terms of laughter as being a bad character, that just what people laugh at is a sign of probably impending violence. That it's a dissonance level. But yeah, I mean, God forbid. So if the news story develops, it's probably not that related to week
You
in
acknowledge
review.
that most people don't see that the laughter thing that way, though.
I think
And
most
it's
experts
totally
do.
fine. It's fine if you do. I respect that that's how you feel, but do you acknowledge most people don't see it that way?
I think most experts see it that way.
I'm
And
talking
I would,
about democratically. If we asked everyone, not just experts, everyone, most people would say laughing's cool.
I'm not sure because so like in class, like saying no, I mean people get punished, people get asked to leave for laughing. I think most people in elementary school or something, like in some authority position,
Yeah, in a
are
formal
used to.
setting, laughing at the teacher is not good, but there are other settings than simply formal ones. Unless you're saying all settings are formal in your eyes, and laughing is really just always a sign of deference, is how you're
I would
interpreting
say
it.
that most people would agree that laughter has negative implications in saying minimally of non-seriousness and including like most parents and to kids, teacher to students have themselves admonished people for laughing or been in a situation where
No one
they've
is
been.
now you're straw manning here because no one's disagreeing that laughing when it's a formal setting is not good because it's showing a lack of reverence for the person who is the authority.
Yeah, and so I'm always formal. I'm always serious. So just saying like, oh, I'm not. I'm usually not serious. I'm only formal and serious when I have to be. And so laughter is a sign of an unserious person. So it's like, why are you so serious? It's like, oh, I think it's a good thing that I'm serious. So I think your average person would probably admit that laughter is a sign of lack of seriousness. And if someone's saying like, oh, like lighten up, um, and like I like in the Bible, I think I was looking at that there's a count of like 45 times where laughter is mentioned in the Bible, and like 42 of them are negative. And so that's thank God I went to Orthodox Jewish schools, and I learned that let alone common experiences, but it was Orthodox Jewish schools where they just was taught and it was accepted that laughter was for just a sign of bad character. And I even had rabbis that were saying like, laughter, like you're not cut out for this, you're not serious enough. So if you wanted to say like being too serious is a bad thing, from my perspective, yeah, I mean someone admitting that they're
Fine,
not
then
that
think of the
serious.
jokes as tests from me to you to see test your resolve.
Well, it just says like, okay, you're not that serious. So I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's
I'm
saying
serious enough
almost,
to learn the science of humor and take it
yeah,
seriously.
even the humor and the science of humor is largely coming out that humor is representative of something bad. I mean, it has a mechanism, it has a purpose, but it's representative of negative intentions, negative subconscious, and that's pretty universal in the science of humor.
Sounds like you proved the thesis with facts and logic.
I mean, we keep on turning back to it, but like, no, I'm pretty sure about this, and saying, okay, you're not a serious person. That's fine. Like most people aren't that serious. Most people have times of best behavior. So I mean, Jennifer maybe was a good student or could have periods of best behavior. But say like, no, my goal is to always be on best behavior. And so laughter would be a sign of a slip, of not constantly being on best behavior. And then certain normalcy, like, no, I don't want to be normal. And normal is usually related to sinful behavior, where say like, oh, lighten up, lighten up. What do you mean lighten up? Like, let's just do sinful behavior. And it's like Doooovid is not interested in sinful behavior, and laughter is minimally like a precursor to sinful behavior. So usually I just see it as a bad sign, and I'm going to stick with that. Saying and I keep on doing scientific research, and so I was glad to see that the scientific consensus is that laughter in general connotates something negative about the human psyche.
All right. I'm trying to collate some information via meta-analysis, and this 3+1, I'm thinking maybe it has, I don't know if it's infinity facets or what, but I found 4. That the Collat's conjecture appears to be on the same level of information content as the others: quantum periodic table, hyperbolic figure 8 not complement, and then just the regular whatever it is that our sensory apparatus identifies as 3 spatial and 1 temporal dimension. Bring that back.
You mean to be screen sharing something?
Not really. It's just more the thoughts I've been having, just the arguments I've been facing, like this notion that if you start to justify axioms, that they're not axioms anymore, that now it's the justifications that are actually the axioms. But if we, I'm not pronouncing on the truth or falsity of that statement, but if we consider Euclidean axioms versus the hyperbolic axioms, they can be justified via their results. It's an enormously problematic notion of parallel lines being able to be extended ad infinitum. Also was made privy to the reason why the Tarski paradox is a thing, which is the axiom of choice. So yay, and as it turns out from a math person, it seems reasonably adept. It can be replicated an arbitrary number of times. It's not just you can get 2 spheres from 1, you can get like 4 then presumably from the 2, and on and on. Big problem if what you're mapping in math is going to have any correspondence to reality, which doesn't abide by that principle. Reality is all about conservation law and symmetry. And then I had that one article about the demonstrated they're calling it photoisomerization, but it's super neat. Entangled 2-photon adsorption has attracted considerable interest due to certain people getting really cranky on the internet. No, just kidding. Due to its potential applications for low photon flux spectroscopy and microscopy, the entanglement parameters in the twin photon state can be exploited to control two photon excitation processes, blah, 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 blah. So, applied analysis type thing, applied something. It's like really metaphysical is what I'm getting at. Framing is everything, you know? Yes, you can entangle photons. Yes, our consciousness functions on the basis of entangled photons. Yes, that's a superposition state. Yes, that's what simulates the free will impression. And on and on. Make a prediction, boom, now it's done. And that's about all that I did this week. Let's see here. Oh, yeah, I had one argument that I kind of came up with, which was, let's see here. The universe is a quantum computer. It's extremely vague, so it's basically unfalsifiable. So to some extent, the method is vagary, and then gradually getting more precise by means of superimposing a bunch of vagaries. I swear it works. Computers simulate order deriving from their, I wasn't sure what the right word was here because I don't want to put coding because I had what's his face in my head again. And then it's an ordered, yeah, anyway, ordered simulation. And then I was saying, well, is that a mind? And then I was thinking of a different way to approach it. Order is a property of both physical and mental, whatever the heck we're going to call mental. Something, order transcends both physical and mental. And therefore something transcends both, which contains at least one property. And the question is, does the thing that transcends both have more in common with the mind-like things or the physical-like things? And that must be the one that is superseding the other. So that was a little bit where my head was at. And I liked the combo. But if you didn't and it was too disordered, there you go. Not for everybody. Philosophy has always been a very... Most of these topics, when done right, they're just never going to garner huge audiences because of how highly precise and specific they are and how much time you have to spend on them.
Well, and if it's just too difficult to even know what they're talking about or disorganized, that if it's just a conversation that, I mean, I like philosophy too, but it's like just listening to some random conversation starting halfway through where it's unclear what they're talking about, that you may not even be directed towards an audience, and to publicly have a conversation, it takes a little bit of a skill to to know you're not just talking to a person, you're talking to an audience. It's like cultural thug that I was talking to him, but I was more talking to the audience than talking to him. And so that if you're watching, like you're listening to me and him talk, but I'm trying to talk directly to the people listening, and so good high quality content it has to take that consideration, and something to get out of it. So you could gain out of maybe two great minds talking or something like that. But I mean, you make it easier with some sort of direction. It's really like a chunking type thing also, that if you don't have the initial how to chunk it, if it's just a conversation in the middle where it's unclear even what they're talking about or why they're talking or where the conversation came from or is going, it's difficult to chunk. And so you could consider that if you're gonna try to produce content in the future, and it should be obvious that there's certain power of the results that you only got like 46 views on that it's probably some semi unintelligible, and maybe you could consider doing like a voiceover introduction or something, like if you did like posting this type stuff where you could do some
I
sort
didn't
of
really listen to the entire thing necessarily. I got a lot of stuff I do. Takes a lot of focus.
yeah, so you have to I mean, if you're putting stuff out for other people, you know, like
It's the kind of thing I want to see more of. If it has 5 people to watch it, great. If it has 500, great.
well, that's why I said I wasn't going to be able to work with politically provoked, and eventually like trying to get them to up their content or have like conversations of good faith or work on debating, that they were just going to kind of probably keep on pumping out the same kind of like B-rate content, and then in order to increase their viewership, do the type stuff that to me is more negative, like narrowcasting, like
Dancing
make
bear type thing?
well, it was just
Bear baiting?
entertainment type. You're trying to make it more entertaining or spicy, or just in a negative way, even where God forbid. So I think that's common, and it's not that difficult. Like I've listened to all these great teaching company, great lecture series. I've taken these courses on these various things, and there's a science to putting out good content, and it takes work. I mean, your reality, it's probably easier to put like the little work into it and produce better content than to produce a bunch of bad content, and then you've seen the results that gaining viewership, building a base, building a network. That
You ever heard
you
of
know,
something called niche appeal?
I mean, it's possible, but it's like I don't
I
even
know
know
what
if you
I'm
have.
doing here.
I mean, saying there is niche appeal, and saying that's the purpose of YouTube to build a niche of people who are actually interested in these topics that aren't that popular among the masses, and that's kind of the counterproductive approach where you try to make things that are never going to be popular among the masses popular among the
Videos that I put
masses.
tons of effort into, like the, quantum periodic table, that took a really long time to learn how to use that program, relatively speaking. It got like 130 views versus 40 some views for something that took me clicking a button. So it's kind of like, Oh, there was questions in the chat, Doovid. Not sure if my mind is supposed to go quiet or are thoughts supposed to come into my mind. I guess you made a recommendation about meditation.
So let me just read. Samish said, comedy, humor, and moderation is always good, but to become an all-encompassing approach to belittle people is simply counterproductive and certainly disrespectful. I mean, from a Talmudic point of view, I say comedy in moderation is probably not good. Saying that you have to deal with people at their level, so comedy could be useful, to the masses. But I say if it's bad character, it's bad character. So it's like logos, ethos, pathos, and comedy generally is pathos. That the majority of comedy is at the pathos level, and so if you're doing public speaks to the masses, there's a decent amount that's going to be in pathos, and that would be things like humor. But if you were more in expertise, and then if you're in expertise, the little amount of comedy would more be pathos, laughing at yourself, why we're not so popular. Because if you're at the top of the pyramid talking to the experts, so then you could have self-defacing humor about how people are not as popular. It's mentioned Jay Dyer. His specialty is, I guess he had a PhD in like movie propaganda, and so talking about movies as some form of programming. So humor is also like that. It's a form of programming, a form of acceptance of dissonance. So Tinkle, I mentioned last week the basic of meditation that Mark Smith, just quick, is the gangster rapper I managed, still alive. I assume so. I'm friends with his daughter on Facebook. I haven't spoken to him in a while. God forbid, who knows? If he, who knows, possibly had bad karma. I'm friends with his daughter on Facebook. I guess I could message or ask her, but I'm assuming he's still around. I don't know. But I doubt his career. Like now he's probably 50, and it's unlikely. He's been out of prison, in and out of prison multiple times. It's extremely unlikely his career. When I was managing him, he was in his mid 30s, so I doubt his career is going to go anywhere at this point. But I'm friends with his daughter on Facebook who had a minimal music career also. So the basic of meditation, so the first step is to quiet the mind, which usually is done by breathing techniques like yoga. Most meditation, you just focus on your breath, or some people, like flow, where he talked about that. Aiken, you talked about the book of flow. Most people feel flow during physical excursion, and a lot of time the reason the mind is quiet is because the body is so focused on physical activity, like the marathon runner's high or something like that, where maybe the majority of the blood is going to the body that not so much is going to the brain, that the person's not really thinking anything. But meditation, not necessarily because physical excursion, where you just stop your mind. Easiest way to do that is just focus on the breath. Is the Rabbi Kids Kicking Cancer near me, I've mentioned a few times. Yes, they feel the coolness of the air as you breathe in, the warmness as you breathe out. Or you could try to regulate your breath, slow your breath, so you're taking fewer breaths in a minute, like deep breaths, to where maybe you're breathing in and out once every 15 seconds or something. The basic breathing techniques that might help for quieting your mind. If you're like Arya Kaplan, Kabbalistic, you could focus on the four-letter name of God. Just try to have that the only thing in your mind. But usually the first step is to quiet your mind. And then when you notice you quiet your mind, uh, usually you could observe the first thing that breaks your the quietness of your mind, the first thought that comes to your mind. And like, God forbid, if it's like sinful activity, like thinking about sexual desire or revenge, or if it's just random memories like Freudian psychoanalysis, and like, like, oh man, that really bothered me when I got beat up in third grade, or when my dad punished me severely when I was young for misbehaving or something like that. That whatever type thoughts are the likeliest to enter your head. But the concept is like, once you quiet your mind, you could observe the first thought that comes out of your mind when it becomes unquiet. And so that's usually the first steps of meditation. And after years of meditation, you could develop basically a constant observer, where it's like a multiple personality, like multiple truth hypothesis, where you have the voice in your head and then you have the observer in your head. And if you're Freudian, Freud actually describes it that way, with the id, ego, and super ego, where you have the id, which is more your base animalistic desire. If God forbid, Doooovid said, murder, rape, steal. But basically, the human animal, that the mammalian, the reptile brain, from a neural correlates of consciousness, might be like the pons, the amygdala. So I have to refresh my to keep on getting better with my neural correlates of consciousness in the neuroanatomy. But the basic mammalian brain, the brainstem, the inner brain, that is similar to animals, that would be having the base function, desires, possibly the emotions, the common understanding that would be related, sending. And then you have your ego, which is your central I, that becomes like a higher order thought, that the hot HOT, higher order thought, that would organize your desires into the I that is going to plot and try to accomplish this. And then on the top of the ego, you have the super ego, which is an even higher order rules, that will come on and say, you can't get away with it. You can't sin and get away with it. And that would be like Freud, civilization, its discontent. So you have the id, that just says, like, God forbid, I want to have sex with anything that moves. I want to, beat and cause harm to anything that I dislike. I want to eat, the rough animalistic desires. And the ego is generally the use of intelligence that's designed to fulfill the animalistic desires. And then you have the super ego, that is the recognition of punishment, and the recognition that you can't just do whatever you want and get away with it. So if the id says, oh, attractive woman. I want to have sex with her. And the ego says, well, let me plot in a way that I might be able to successfully have sex with her. And then the super ego would come with the higher level rules that say, like, no, no, she's a married woman. You're never going to be able to have sex with her, or you're just some sort of larger rationality that would trump the person's desire. So the ego is largely a slave to the id and is purely there to try to help the person fulfill the animalistic desires. And then the superego has a larger control purpose that has a larger rationale that you're not going to be able to fulfill the majority of animalistic desires. And from a Freudian perspective, the superego, really the purpose is also to help people fulfill animalistic desires and is largely evolutionary. But so from that perspective, subconsciously from a Freudian level, the animalistic desire is observed by the ego, and then the voice in the head, like the thought process, is thinking, plotting how to fulfill the animalistic desires, and then the superego comes in and says, um, you're not really going to be able to get away with it in a larger framing of the rules that we have to live by for success. And it could be, goal oriented towards actually achieving as many animalistic desires as possible. As Freud said, the guy studying for his PhD, the person studying physics or thinking abstract thought, are they really doing that so that they could reproduce? And say yes. But the person doing that, realizes that they can't, just rape or steal and get away with it, that they have to have some sort of achievement or prestige in society in order to attract a mate or something like that. So it's all still based on the fulfillment of the animalistic desire. So just saying that this idea of an observer is also Freudian, but to say, like, there is an I that can separate itself from the mind and observe the mind, and then you could work with the mind, where you say, what thought is coming to my head, and then you could somewhat psychoanalyze yourself and reach deeper states of meditation. But I said, to reach higher levels of meditation, you have to develop this internal observer. And from a Freudian level, you have to turn the subconscious conscious, that you develop the observer by recognizing the subconscious, and the subconscious is largely negative. So saying, I observe my animalistic reptilian brain sending me animal signals. I observe my mind and my ego trying to fulfill the animalistic desires. And then I observe my superego informing my ego that you can't just fulfill these desires, and possibly like some sort of long-term strategy that would make either some sort of calculation of how could I achieve at least my most important desires. So say if the animal mind always wants to be promiscuous and have sex with as many women as possible, the super ego, might tell me that you'll be able to reproduce, you'll be able to have sex, but just with one woman in a monogamous relationship. So that my ego will tell me, basically every wanting to, bang everything that moves, will tell me that, like, no, you're going to be able to fulfill the reptilian animalistic desire of reproducing through some sort of marriage level. And so you could observe the mind, the animal mind, and then exert some sort of greater level cognitive control. And so this is like a Freudian evolutionary, JF kind of like nihilistic approach. From a more spiritual approach, there's more to it than just the reptilian animal brain trying to reproduce. But the method is still the same, that you observe yourself, the subconscious becomes conscious, and you realize these base desires. And then you also realize the higher cognitive level rules that prevent you from acting upon the base level rules, where you say, like, yeah, I'm mad as hell and I can't take it anymore. But I have higher level thoughts that control my action, and make me realize that even though I'm mad as hell and can't take it anymore, that I'm not going to act like an animal because that's not productive. And even though I'm so angry that I want to, just beat everybody that I hate. And God forbid, I'm so horny that I want to rape every woman that I see, or, God forbid, that I have some sort of moral compass that controls myself from acting on these desires. And so you need to reach a higher level of self realization, meditation, that you could see your own mind working. And it's very difficult for people in the beginning because our mind is a very scary, dangerous place. So you kind of have to embrace the human animal. I embrace the fact that I am a human animal and I have desires like any animal. And we put in the cold-blooded term, rape, murder, steal. That anytime I see something, it sends a signal to my brain. I want it. Take it. I don't care whose it is. I don't care how you get it. Just take it. And so that's the natural inclination of how every human being sees when they see something that they want, is just to steal it, just to take it. But then there's higher level rules that say you can't act like that. And whatever mechanism that a person recognizes that they can't just act out on their desires, that you could see your own mind operating. You could even be uncomfortable, like a martial arts training or something like that, or semen retention or something like that, where you could see your own mind working, and you could generally, God forbid, like you see a woman and it increases sexual desire, and so you send a signal to your testes to produce semen, and you indulge on the desire and say, wow, wouldn't that be pleasurable to have sexual relations with that, and that causes the body to produce excess semen, and you say, oh, I recognize my mind doing what the mind does, and then you could exert some sort of control over that, and that could be seen possibly in things like semen retention or anger management. I see someone doing something that I dislike and it's causing anger, and because I recognize that, I could prevent myself from indulging on the anger and just recognize that the dissonance is there and anger is not beneficial, and use the higher uh, ordered thought, and so, and also just quiet the mind. So like basic of, like, if you're in rabbinic school or something like that, anytime you have a negative emotion, lust, anger, greed, jealousy, you just quiet the mind. Like, oh, I see someone who has things that I want, and so jealousy's arised. I see, uh, attractive woman, sexual desire arises. I see something that I don't like, anger arises, and usually most people just indulge on that, and that's like entertainment and laughter is generally a form of indulging upon bad desire. So you just quiet your mind and say, like, back to thinking nothing. So the first step always is thinking nothing. And so then in any scenario where you see your mind rising something that you think you shouldn't be thinking, just quiet it so you're thinking nothing again. Meditative state, that I've cleared my mind. It's just blank. I'm thinking nothing. I'm focusing on my breath. And even like Ted Cruz with Donald Trump, you just breathe. Like usually if you're in a bad situation, just breathe, just focus on your breath, and the anger dissipates, and whatever it was taking over your consciousness fades away, and you could clear your mind. But as I said, after you've been doing that a few
Really
years,
sounds a bit like Serenity Now.
but it's a basic meditation. Just like you quiet your mind, and then you learn to observe your mind, and then you
No, the
develop.
idea is that the quiet comes about as a result of repeated attempted at non-dual awareness.
Well, anyone could quiet their mind. I think there's hundreds of techniques to quiet your
A
mind.
mind which is quieted and thoughts which are temporarily stifled are not in any sense comparable.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like Freudian, the subconscious. So it's like, yeah, I'm mad as hell about what happened to me when I was a little kid, and I'm still mad as hell. But every time something reminds me of it, I get mad as hell, and it sucks, because God forbid that tragedy happened to me, and I never was able to overcome it, and till death sets me free, I'm gonna be irritated anytime something reminds me of this time that I suffered. Um, so just quieting the mind doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but to say that you could always quiet your mind, and there's plenty of techniques, most of them breathing related. The simplest way is just taking deep breaths and focusing on your breathing. And but that sometimes won't do the trick, but usually just that does the trick. Saying advanced meditative technique is when you develop a permanent observer. And so if it's like Herman's mind, or like Jennifer saying she's got two Doovids on her shoulders or something, you have a voice on your shoulder, one voice saying, like Freudian, the ego
A mere metaphor.
and the super ego. The ego saying, um, plot and figure out how to indulge in the deepest animalistic fantasies that your mind, that your body keeps on telling you to do. And then you have the super ego, kind of the side of good, saying like, no, don't be an animal, focus on higher level thoughts, and be some sort of enlightened person. And like, so the Hebraic, you're just Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov. You have one side towards good and one side towards bad, and they're both constantly with you. There's always one voice, and a lot of people say that's where Freud largely got his ideas from, was this Hebraic Kabbalistic concept of the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, the inclination to bad and good. Um, but there's deeper understandings. So I say the first step is to quiet the mind, and then observe the mind, and then to develop a permanent observer. So if you're enlightened, like Swami means master of the senses. That you become a Swami when you've mastered the senses. And it's like, okay, like, God willing, I'm enlightened because I've mastered my senses, and I don't act upon my senses. I'm aware of my senses, and no matter what signal the material world sends myself, that will not be the controller of my action. The higher level thought, the super soul, will control my action. And so from that perspective, is you need to become a Swami, you need to master the senses, and you need to create this observer that is always with you, that will in all cases be aware of the signal that the senses are sending, and be able to exert a higher level of control, that no matter what the circumstance, you're not going to act upon the senses, you're going to act on some higher level cognitive faculty, rationality, or some function of the super soul. I mean, I don't know if that's how you see it, Jennifer. I mean, but that is definitional what Swami means.
Well, if we're going to look at it from the...
It means master of the senses.
Sure. If we're going to look at it from the point of view of the 8-limb path, which is like the hatha generic thing, meditation would be less of a practice and more of a, like you're saying, permanent fixture.
Well, I mean, it starts with just breathing. The first step is just breathing, stopping the mind, till eventually you have you have this, you've developed a super soul that always overrides the senses, or takes control, and so that you're never just react to the senses, but the super soul always intercedes with what the senses send to our to our mind.
Sounds fair enough. Just in terms of a practice, I sort of hesitate to recommend it. It presupposes that one is already intimately familiar with many things that many people who aren't familiar with those things are nevertheless endeavoring these practices.
Well, hatha yoga is also similar to like the breathing or like the flow from extreme physical exertion where you hold a stretch for a period of time where maybe it causes pain or discomfort to that it quiets the mind. And so if you have a yoga instructor that is pushing you like a physical
Yoga
trainer.
instructor. Oh, I see. Oh my gosh. I think I've told you that story already, when that happened to me. Please go on.
Well, I'm saying if you just a normal yoga instructor where you're doing a pose, you have a stretch, and it starts to hurt, and they say hold it, like another 10 seconds, another 15 seconds, and the mind becomes clear, just waiting time, just like oh, in a few more seconds, I'm going to be able to end the pain by getting out of this stretch. Um, so that's also a method of clearing the mind, like I said, like running a marathon or something like like a typical physical excursion. So it's like hatha yoga has its relationship to meditative control, and to say that yes, you do learn to stop the mind and clear the mind by doing these stretches, but it's not
Sure, but
meditative
if
in the
we're looking
sense
at
that
the limb path, the closest to stretching is asana, which means seat, which gets not missed, but sort of something that more closely resembles British military calisthenics than anything that might have been considered traditional in its aerobicness. But we'll just say that when we're saying meditation, we're referring to very broad, large tent meditation, not the end result of long periods of austerities, etc.
austerities are also a method like fasting, where
Fasting is a type of austerity.
and even God forbid mortification of the flesh, like in severely, like I mentioned, the Kabbalists or some of the yogis who actually do actual mortification of the flesh, but just a regular fasting where at a certain point the only thing the mind is thinking about is food, and then you carry that on maybe a few hours, and the only thing so that period it clears the mind, and or it focuses the mind on just a single desire where I'm so hungry that I can't think about anything other than food and pain in general. God forbid if it's bad health, if it's like a toothache or an injury or a cut or something like that, where just like the only thing my mind signal in my mind right now is just focused on the pain, and so there's all sorts of convergent understandings about this controller of the mind. And so from the neural correlates of consciousness, like qualia, the hard problem of consciousness, we don't really have a scientific understanding of how this mechanism works. Like so you could of what is this, what is the mind, what is this voice in my head, what are these desires, and even how is it possible that I could tell you what I desire? Like if you think like an animal or something like that, you might sense, but who is I was trying to say politically provoked, but I couldn't even get any like high IQ conversations there. Like what's the best argument for consciousness, and the best argument for the best argument for the soul, and the best argument for the soul is consciousness, and the fact that there is an I. The fact that I'm talking to Jennifer, and Jennifer is the controller of like a body. There is a physical body that Jennifer resides in, but the fact that there's a controller of the body who could abstractly talk about concepts, or could talk about like how she feels or what she's doing, that scientifically it's very unclear how that works or how that comes from the brain or any process that I could talk about my desires when I was a kid, or how I was in this circumstance and how it made me feel. So who is that I that is observing myself that could tell a separate entity about the experience that I felt? So in terms of talking to an atheist or debating for the soul, most of these concepts are based on Hindu Jewish practices that all understand that it's a soul controller separate from the body that is the observer. So, that they use these Kabbalistic Vedic language of the observer, and it's understood that the observer is something outside of the body. It's not the body within itself. Although practical meditation and most practical meditation or self improvement or even you're trying to uh, induce hyper performance, physical or mental, is usually atheistic, evolutionary leaning, and it's put as a technique largely based on uh, the idea that the observer is something internal that arises from within the body, and it's usually essentially flawed because that's why I said the best argument for the soul is consciousness, and to understand that this observer that anybody who does basic meditation can develop um, logically can't or is very unlikely to be within the body. And maybe so if you have atheistic evolutionary leanings, meditation is very difficult for people because this concept of developing the observer, it's like, well, that's absurd. Except if you're, a mystic, if you're a dualist or even a monist who thinks that the essential you, the soul, is not the body, then it's quite logical that you could develop this observer of yourself, because this yourself that you're developing isn't your body. So of course you could have an observer that observes yourself, as opposed to your evolutionary atheist that's I am, like T Jump or something, that use T Jump lacks self-awareness because of his philosophy. He's an atheist, he's a materialist, and so he doesn't believe that an observer exists. So he doesn't have an observer, and it's very difficult for him to develop an observer. And you could see that T Jump is really not a self-aware person. And even like JF or someone like that, he's not self-aware because his philosophy is limiting himself to not be able to develop this observer because of his atheistic materialistic leanings that would likely say that this observer is impossible.
It does appear to be the operating the position they're operating under, the assumption they've embraced, operating axiom. What you?
Whoops. If you ask T Jump, like, can you observe yourself, and then how is it possible to observe yourself? And
yeah, but then you run into the problem of matching testimony with the inner experience, and you can't really disentangle that in any self-evident way necessarily.
Well, I'm saying if you're a spiritualist, a mystic, it's simple. You say, well, I observe myself, the soul, and the soul is the controller, and so I observe, like the animalistic desire that the body sends my mind or the senses perceive and filters through the animalistic desires, that this super soul doesn't reside in the body and therefore could control the action. So from Freud perspective, the superego is still a servant of the id, and the whole reason the superego does what it does is so that you could succeed at reproducing. God forbid. That said, the superego, the id, just basically wants to reproduce, and the superego is a tool of the id to help the person reproduce, saying like, you can't just rape every woman that you see, it's not going to work. You need to work hard and achieve and build up status and participate in a monogamous marriage in order that you could, God forbid, have the end goal of having sex and reproducing. But from the Freudian terms, even the superego purpose is largely submissive to the id, and the purpose of the superego is largely to help the id achieve its main goal, which according to Freudian is largely reproduction. But if you take a Kabbalistic or Vedic approach. It's like, no, the super soul has nothing to do with the body, and the super soul actually is at possibly conflict with the body. And it could be the Freudian interpretation is correct, that the body is essentially sending this signal. I think it said the 4 Fs. I was watching this MIT program on the brain, the 4 Fs: food, fight, and I guess reproduction is a F. I forget if it's 3 or 4 Fs, but however you want to put it, like the Vedas of or any of these texts that say the body has this essential function, the 4 Fs that sends to the mind to accomplish, but the super ego is not actually part of the body and is at in essence in direct conflict with the body. And so the Freudian interpretation is it's useful for understanding. It's similar, it's parallel, but from a spiritual perspective it's completely different, because they're like, no, in the Freudian sense the super ego is submissive to the goal of the id, which is reproduction. And in the spiritual, the Vedic, the Kabbalistic sense, the super soul is not submissive to the whims of the body, and it's at odds of the body. And the super ego, the super soul, has the ability to control the body against the animalistic desires that the body sends it. And so that's why definitionally I think the Sanskrit, Goswami, literally means one that's mastered his senses, and it's a soul recognition level. According to Freud, you could only sublimate the senses. You can't actually master the senses. You could only sublimate them to use a more intelligent approach to fulfill, the sense gratification, as opposed to, the Goswami, where you could master your senses and have some sort of non-physical control mechanism that filters what the senses tells, and whether it's rational from a spiritual perspective to follow the advice of the senses, or how to control the human animal, that you have the sense signals, but the control mechanism, the controller of the body, just takes the advice and input of the senses, but the decision is not made as per the senses. It just has the counsel of the senses, and there's some sort of higher function, higher goal that the person who's mastered their senses bases the human action off of.
I really enjoy hearing these considerations. I was thinking of a new word, observer, as opposed to observer, because it's really hard to get the notion across that someone was saying in the chat before, I think it was Victoria, like feels like a conversation with someone. There's a voice
Well, it's
that
the
you're
bindi.
hearing.
I mean, it's the Egyptian tip of the pyramid sign, the third eye, but it's also the basic Hindu bindi, the red dot that's commonly seen, among Hindus. That's the representative of the third eye, the mind's eye, the eye observer.
Yeah, the idea is that energetically there would be as little separation as possible between both, but that there frequently is a report of at least a binary system, i.e., a subject which is receiving either, criticism or ideas or whatever is coming in from somewhere else, right? But what the simulation is, i.e., the first person experience, how that bears out in reality is far from self-evident. Back to the hard problem of consciousness. Do you think it's significant that they have that precedent for entangled photons being useful for quantum computing, or do you think it's going to take more research before you can be sure?
Well, I think they might make progress with quantum computing on a level of actually building computers that have more processing power based off of it, and that they might have more insight into human biology based off of it, that might have some benefits towards biology, including the neural correlates of consciousness. Like I was mentioning, the National Institute of Health's Brain Initiative largely focused on mapping the neurons for health benefit for curing diseases in the elderly. But no, I don't think that even any of this photonic stuff will make much development in the hard problem of consciousness, because it's like, no, it's the mind, the controller is not material, and so the photon, any of the quantum computing photonic interface will just be more neural correlates of consciousness. It's not actually consciousness, because consciousness doesn't exist in the material realm, and it doesn't exist in photonic form either. I am not my body. I'm not photons either. Like
well, maybe the consciousness doesn't exist here, whatever that means, but there's some correlate of it.
Well, yeah, I'm saying that, so the photonic.
So we can observe some connection to it. Wouldn't it be like with DNA and personality? There's some connection, but it's very distant.
Well, it'd be further neural correlates of consciousness. So, like, yeah, I mean, we will be able to observe more and more neural correlates of consciousness. But like, no, the photonic, quantum computing, in my estimation, is not going to help at all in moving forward on the hard problem of consciousness.
You don't see how a precedent being demonstrated, a proof of concept, bolsters the position that the principle of consciousness in the material realm is entangled photon waveforms undergoing reduction?
No, I think that, in my mind, that it's only going to be a more advanced understanding of sense perception, and that the quantum entanglement photons, it doesn't have anything to do with consciousness or the controller. It's just going to be a more advanced understanding of sense perception. And it could be sense perception is going to be
the whole idea, Doooovid, is that the least action principle predicts that the sensations must be maximally entangled with the experiencer.
Yeah, but it's saying the experiencer isn't photonic reduction. The experiencer,
fine, it's then photonic reduction
is a non-physical thing. Photons are physical. The controller, the I, consciousness, is non-physical. And photonic, there's all descriptions of what I'm going to classify as physical processes. And so, like, no, it's not in essence going to help with consciousness to have a greater understanding of physical processes.
Memes asks if consciousness is the will to persist. Well, I would say that there's two words in there that are quite non-impersonal. It's not very 3 + 1 of you. Will, ill-defined, has baggage from what's his dumbass name. Persist, again, inertia is the word for that in physics. Don't need to invoke all these extra terms for the actual formalism. If you want to invoke extra terms, write a poem.
No, I'm saying it's almost on the opposite direction. I mean, if you take from our Hare Krishna friends, I am not my body. My consciousness is not my body. And if you're saying the will to persist in this body, it's like, no, the consciousness is not connected to the body, and it's not related to the will to persist in the body. And the reality is consciousness, so to say, the I that is not this body is going to persist whether you want it to or not. Like, it's not a matter of will. Consciousness by definition persists. You don't have to will it to persist. Your consciousness, so to say, the I survives death. You don't need to will your I to survive death. By definition, your consciousness is non-physical. So memes is still thinking in an evolutionary materialistic form. that the question demonstrates kind of that he's not understanding this, the basic, if you put it in the most simple terms, I am not my body. And, so his question almost assumes the fallacy that he is his body.
Or in some way inextricable from his brain. To give it the most charitable interpretation possible.
Yeah, so that your I, your consciousness is going to persist regardless of your will. Even if you will not to persist, your consciousness, is, so to say, immortal and will survive death. And
yeah, so then you'd be stuck redefining will as something spontaneous, which appears to defeat the whole purpose, because colloquially, when you say will, it's implying that you have to sort of dredge it up from the depths.
you're talking localized or global consciousness, or if you mean, are you saying that there is an individual me or you, like in Sanskrit, the jiva, that everybody has unique jiva, which is an individual soul, and that is immaterial. It survives death. It was around before this body of ours that we're currently in. Will be around after it, and there is like a global oneness. The Lord Chaitanya, the Achintya Veda Veda, these paradoxical concepts, how is all one and they're separate, the non-qualified dualism or whatever, that are these apparent logical contradictions, where you're saying like there is an individual I, and there is also a global consciousness, and the individual I is not this body, it's the controller of the body, and the consciousness in some form is the combination of the jiva and the body, but in essence the consciousness is not the body. What we experience as consciousness, it's very difficult to differentiate between what is the pure consciousness that's not the body and the relationship to the current body that we're in. And so if you want to base it on like Kabbalistic or Vedic or sages that have kind of a laid out system of how these things work, or personal meditation, that is saying once you've developed the observer, and I guess I would speculate that you probably have to be a believer to develop the observer, because the observer is not physical, the observer is not part of your body, and so if you think that you are this body, you probably can't develop the observer. You might be able to reach some levels of meditation, impulse control, enlightenment, control of the senses, but like probably unlikely that you could be a master of the senses if you think that you're the body, because the essential reality truth is that the observer, the I, the controller is not the body.
Meme's asking, how can we differentiate us from flora, fauna, and a rock? So a naive person would say, well, it's obviously the physical correlate of the phenomenon we identify as those things, which is the distinction. It's the fact that those are separate sacks. But actually, can't really draw those distinctions in any absolute sense. That's why consciousness has to be intrinsic, because there's no mechanism for it to arise.
I mean, from the Kabbalistic view, that's the importance of free will. But we're saying that, like, no, I mean, the I is specific to a human body, even though I am not this body. But it's like not like the I could just be in a rock, because the I takes in the sense perception and then is the controller that makes decisions and controls the body. So the rock doesn't have decisions that it makes. It doesn't have sense perception. It might on a certain level, but on the simple level, you say like, no, the rock doesn't have sense perception, and it doesn't have choice and decision that, if you use the terminology of free will. So you say like, no, I mean that you are not your body, but you are the controller of the body, and the you that you are is specific to the fact that you are in control of your body and has the ability to make these decisions. And at that same time, you say like could a rock be thinking about calculus? The rock have like a mind, and the mind thinking about abstract ideas. Theoretically, possibly, but like no, that's probably unique.
Think of it more like, on what level is the rock not able to not be embodying some attribute of calculus?
Well, I was saying a rock. I mean, really, from the Kabbalistic view, you have to use the term free will.
What's with the fucking negativity on the questionnaire there? 71%? I'm going to maybe thinking I'm going to go with it because it's so dang unpopular. The point to the memes question is that we can't differentiate in an absolute sense, so you can justify to whatever extent makes sense to varying degrees of success models which don't necessarily bear correspondence to reality, other than that they meet the standard of functioning the way you might say a black box, something that has a demonstrated mechanism of a particular result, but no insight necessarily as to how said result was attained. Anyway, just want to quickly interject that. Not sure if I actually got to the end of what I was saying. Yeah, so it's just basically an argument for zeroology type knowledge of what is and what isn't, and there's a technique called neti, where it's gradual reduction of mind chatter, presumably. Gradual process of reducing the mind down to a fine object, the way you'd imagine making a sword from melted or semi-molten metal, whatever. Basic thing. And then understanding why the synthetic categoricals, if that's what they are, which there's an argument to what degree they're synthetic or whatever, emergent, I don't really care, but I just want to be specific. So it's awesome.
Yeah, but you think if you meditate, you'll have some sort of spiritual awakening. And the first awakening is usually this, that you're not the body. That the I, the controller of the body, is not actually.
Probably depends quite a bit on the technique you used to achieve your state of mind, don't you think?
No matter what the technique, that you eventually, the goal of basically all techniques is to develop the observer and the controller, and in order to do that, you're going to have to recognize that the observer, the controller, is not your body. So I think to a certain level, it doesn't matter the technique. That that you need to develop the observer and the controller to master the senses. You can't master the senses unless you recognize that the controller of the senses is not the body. So at some point in your meditative journey, you'll have a soul discovery, like, oh, I have a soul. I'm not this body, and it'd be related to being free of the fear of death to the certain extent, and to a delocalization of karma, to saying that your realities are greater than your bodily experience. And you might have a temporarily feeling like, okay, like you're running and you exhausted yourself and your mind is clear and you feel at one with nature, that you wouldn't be able to put it, because you're still in a materialistic level that you didn't connect it to. I'm not my body. That you came in touch with your soul and the controller, and then you realize that the controller is not actually the body, and you just felt it, like in terms of being at one with creation or the creator. But to have that observer, you have to have this recognition that I'm not the body, and my soul is is real, and my soul will survive death, and the various theological implications that are basically universal in all religions.
Victoria wants to know if you can astral project.
I'm not claiming to be able to do any special thing, saying that these are basic meditative techniques. So it's okay. So I mean, in theory, when you realize that you're not the body, and you're like Prabhupada has a book, easy journeys to other planets, and in terms of yogi techniques, like okay, like become the rock, separate from yourself, and then move the rock. Um, in theory, that may be possible. So in terms like Kabbalah, there's practical Kabbalah, and then there's theoretical Kabbalah, and practical Kabbalah is kind of like magic, and going outside of the rules of the material realm. And so I'm more practical in the sense like no, I don't think. I mean, I'm more grounded that I'm not claiming to be able to do miracles. I believe in miracles and transcendence, and that you could somewhat trump material nature. But generally, like so, no, um, you could understand the soul, but you can't escape the bounds of the material realm, and you can't separate. Like only death will set us free. So that's the purpose of the expression. You've heard me use it quite often, maybe in terms of conflict or saying like I don't fear death, or even look forward to death, to the larger theological sense. But it's like no, death will set us free, and until death sets us free, that the soul is in essence trapped in the body, limited by the body. That when I took birth till the day I die, that I am limited from this body. And that also like Kabbalists taught, like when you go to sleep, does soul return, or meditative possibilities. If it mentioned like entering other people's dreams, changing karma. Sages talk about things like that, but like no, I mean basic is that the soul is trapped in the body till death. Or if you trapped might be a word that could lead to misunderstanding. So
Localized.
the soul is localized and limited by the given body till death, and only death will delocalize the soul.
Yeah, that's very well said. And I would add to that the universe we inhabit is subject to both a principle of non-locality and locality. Because what it actually is a spectrum between locality and non-locality. It seems sort of silly, but that's the best way I can really understand it, because I'm just looking at all this stuff and it's like, well, why is there localizations that there are in the stars that I see and everything? And it just appears to be a balance in the sort of pummel pump function of the balance point of uncertainty and gravity, which essentially, well, because uncertain, okay, we'll just say quantitative exclusion here. Balance point between those two things is essentially operating in separate, directions, because space-time hasn't emerged at this point. Matter has been churned, but it hasn't crystallized space-time yet. So anyway.
The sages sometimes talk about this stuff, like believe in the sages. The Hasidic saying is like, there's a lot of miracle stories about the big rabbis. And so, saying, do you really believe all these stories? So they like, no, but I believe they're possible. And you should believe in the sages, believe that this stuff is possible. They talk about it, but it's not important. Like Prabhupada said, he's not here to teach you how to be a yogi, teach you the love of God and to recognize the essential truths, and some sort of higher. Like the goal is not to be able, be some sort of miracle man or escape.
Yeah, I would recommend against any type of astral projection, LARP.
But yeah, I wouldn't rule it out that that in even to say that sages have claimed to be able to do such things or have done those type things, but wouldn't worry about it. Like start with the basic, first become a Goswami, which means mastering your senses, and then worry about that stuff. And mastering the senses is quite an accomplishment that very few people accomplish.
So what do you think the signs of a person who's mastered their senses are? The properties.
well, I mean, self-control. I mean, usually upright. I mean, like, God forbid, I keep on harping on laughter, but severe levels of self-control in all circumstances. That usually in terms of feats of like anger or lust or something like that, where the person would clearly be in a situation where your average person would have succumbed to the senses, and the master controlled themselves. So in like wealth, followers, um, and usually in terms of impeccable character and behavior. So like no one's accusing the real guru of having forbidden sexual relations, and no one's accusing the guru of having done immoral behavior, and there's usually been witness that the person has been extremely trustworthy and extremely uh, trying situations, and showed the most impeccable, upright, moral character.
I'm not sure if that's a question in the chat about DMT there. It would appear the way this works is to inhibit, what we might describe as subjectivity, and what I call ego.
Drugs could help you have this observer experience, but it's largely artificial. Saying the awakening that I'm not my body, and I'm the controller of the body, and mastering the senses is real, as opposed to an induced experience of becoming the observer artificially, without mastery of the senses. That's what it is. It's artificial.
You'd be catapulted into a state, presumably, of pure experience and a difficulty to center in, basically have any type of center. And so there's always this reports of clockwork elves, is it? It's pretty. I've seen images of people referring to them. To me, they more just look like not even fractals, like more like kaleidoscopic renderings or some quasi-fractal shit.
It's parallel to your extreme physical excursion, where you quiet the mind or become one with nature, because you've exhausted the body so much that the mind doesn't have the ability to think. And so you could have some sort of mystical experience by extreme physical excursion, also like by drugs, but it's artificial, it's temporary.
I'd call that paranormal conscious, not mystical. Mystical appears to entail insight. Oh boy, cringe. I just searched up, clockwork elves. And one of the images that comes up is Joe Rogan and, oh gosh, I forget this guy's name. He's an anarcho-capitalist, I think. And then there's Alex Gray art and just random stuff, so not much of a pattern here. I guess you haven't read much into DMT and the experiences.
No, I wouldn't recommend it. Oh, I mean, they could give some sort of spiritual experience, some sort of precursor to the recognition that you're not the body.
It's a way to force some degree of displacement from fully localized consciousness, normal consciousness, quote unquote. So yeah. Oh, there you go, Michael Malice. That's it. Thanks, Lambie. Huh. Yeah, I've been confronted with that argument a few times, and I think it's good to just remind people, I don't think anyone's ever really got any demonstrable insights. I'm sure a lot of people felt like they were insights. Not to be a stick in the mud or anything, but I've certainly never heard of anybody making any significant discoveries in this manner.
Anything else you want to talk about? I mean, we got 2 hours now, so if you want to monologue or something, you got 20 people watching, pretty big crowd. But I'll stick around a little bit if there's anything else you want to talk about, or we could wrap up. And you got 23 people, so feel free to monologue if you want.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I just want to know where you think consciousness stuff is going, because it seems like you think basically there's no answer because of religious reasons.
Well, not because of religious reasons. I mean, because I believe in dualism, and it's saying like death will set us free. That no, I mean we're not going to answer these questions. The limitation and the understanding of the purpose of taking birth and being in the material realm, and it's not to answer these questions. These things, hopefully at the time of death, if we lived our life properly or see what happens, it will maybe achieve the answers. I mean, we have a greater understanding of consciousness, saying that the mind, the soul, is an observer of the spiritual realm also. That's the same way that our perception observes the material realm, the soul also observes the spiritual realm. So meditation, prayer, study of scripture, the person could become in tune with the spiritual realm and the observation of the spiritual realm, but it'll never be empirical. So there'll be no way to make scientific advancement on spirituality. And saying you could have like a logical delineation of it, a comparative interfaith, but in reality, it's likely that the sages of previous generations already said and had what to say, all the useful things on the topic. So it's unlikely that we're going to come up with anything better than that's laid out in the scripture, and we're probably better off studying and memorizing the scripture. There probably will be continual advancements on the neural correlates of consciousness, maybe photonic waveforms and quantum computing, but at the end of the day, like, no, I don't think that will be much more than just continued neural correlates of consciousness. That they'll never maybe it'll be it's somewhat demonstrated, or people, there'll always be materialists who think the observer, they're going to be able to figure out that the observer comes from a material form. But I doubt. I think the logic will dictate that the observer cannot, the controller cannot derive from the material. So it's not really the question of solving the hard problem of consciousness. The question is fulfilling our dharma, fulfilling our duty, and
Which may or may not include solving the hard problem of consciousness.
well, no, I'm saying it's not going to be solved. That's what I'm saying. And so just to focus, to meditate, to think about these things. I mean, the purpose of it is like to become you focus on the hard problem of consciousness in order to become a swami and to control the senses and to actualize our potential. Not like we're going to solve the problem, and then the riddle of why the soul entered, took birth, and the origin and destination of the soul. Like, no, we're not going to be able to solve that in material form. The sages clearly said that there's a limiting factor of material form that we can't. It's actually impossible for us to understand these more complicated. So the purpose of studying these topics is not to solve it, but to maximize and actualize our potential while we're in this form. And so say at one point, death will set us free, and we'll see what will happen. Maybe we'll be reincarnated, or maybe we'll be set free from the material realm, and at that point, the answers, will become clear.
Like whether there's a physical solution to the hard problem of consciousness?
Well, I'm saying death is the solution. Death is the only solution to the, like saying that
it's not any solution.
Well, it's not necessarily a solution, but saying death will set us free from the boundaries that prevent us from knowing the answer. And it's not like, guaranteed when we all die, we're going to be given the answers to these questions. So hopefully, if you have good karma, you live your life as good as possible, exhibit sense control the senses, and are as pure as possible from sin, that death will actually set someone free and will be given the answers to these, as opposed to God forbid, taking lower birth. But to say like, no, the only solution will come from death and when the soul is freed from the prison of the body.
And why is that freedom again? Because of the dualism?
Because the body is a limiting factor on the soul.
The body's the limiting factor of the soul. That's
Because
really
the answers to these questions do not lie in the material realm. There is nothing in the material realm that will help provide answers to these questions. And so the soul, so to say, being trapped as the controller of the body, is trapped in the material realm, and the answers to these questions don't lie in the material realm. So I mean that's the basic logic. Saying just accept it. That you could understand the material realm better and better, and so there's like neural correlates or these things, but the answers to these questions lie in the spiritual realm, not the material realm. And as long as we're in material form, we're going to be extremely limited by how far we could understand this.
Yeah, I'd say fundamentally distinguishing a rising and falling experience, reconciling that apparent dualism.
We'll just say the answer to consciousness does not lie in the material realm. End of statement, period.
I was getting to that
No
being
exception.
a self-referential thing and thus having some intrinsic, I was agreeing with you basically, so some physical intrinsic limitation to that process because it's self-referential.
Yeah, so I'm saying like end of the day, like no, there's nothing you could do within the material realm that is going to help
Well, the
understand
question is,
consciousness.
does what happens in the material realm and the super material realm, are they within are they near each other's boundaries or in the neighborhood of each other, or however you want to word that? Are they adjacent?
Well, so what
You're saying
means
categorically no. Is that right?
so the answer would have to be an outside observer. So like yes, when you recognize that I am not my body, I'm the controller of my body, and my soul is non-material, then you could see that the soul
No, the
also
conclusion is
observes.
that the observations necessitate
We're
an
saying that the
observer.
soul also observes the spiritual realm. So you could have insight into consciousness in the spiritual realm by becoming more soul consciousness, because the soul is also capable of observing the spiritual realm.
Looks like no is starting to lose. So the soul is the intermediary between both. And the two are disjoint sets.
Well, there's schools of dualism. So I'm saying, like, if Ramona's or however you understand your dualism, but
Well, dualism is part of my system. It's just also non-dual due to logic.
Well, I mean, because what due to flawed logic to say that no, I mean, you can't use the laws of the material realm to describe the spiritual realm. You say the I that controls my body, that is me, is not part of the material realm, and this essential I that you could develop and become in touch with through meditation, prayer, chanting, is also capable of observing the spiritual realm. But like no, you're not going to be able to solve these mysteries just by meditation or being involved with the spiritual realm, because I mean, according to some understandings, maybe you can, like the journeys to other planets, or you could, but it won't be able to be expressed in material words. That even if your soul, you did get in touch with the essential I and understand the spiritual realms, it wouldn't be expressible to other people in material terms. I mean,
I guess I'm reminded of the neural correlates of consciousness, and principle agree with what you're saying, but that we do have access to some correlate, if for lack of a better term.
well, it's saying like you're not going to be able to put it in words or expression, because those are functions of the material realm. So if you had a realization of the spiritual realm, it would be a realization that wouldn't be expressed in material terms.
Again, It's a question of whether some correlate thereof is able to be put into symbolic form meaningfully.
But it's a question whether logic, or is tried to show in my chart, and that in likelihood that logic and the science and math are higher order rules of the material realm, but they're not higher order rules of the spiritual realm. The spiritual realm is not bound by these same rules. So when you come in touch with the soul, even though things like math and logic likely derive from the spiritual realm, they don't rule the spiritual realm. They rule the material realm. They're just an object of the spiritual realm, not a ruling factor of the spiritual realm. So to be able to communicate it, you'd have to put it in this form, and that form is essentially a material form, so it'd be counterproductive towards the actual understanding of the spiritual realm. So you just have to accept that, like, the limiting factor, like death will set us free. Till then, focus on our duty. You'll say, okay, well, I'll die one day, and hopefully I'll live a righteous life, and I'll return to the spiritual realm, and these higher things I'll have access to, and so I'll worry about that when I get there. It doesn't pay to worry about that, worry about what's going to happen to my soul when it's released of the body, because that's not the purpose now. The purpose now is to worry about the soul's function within this body.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it's really basic theology. And so it's, I mean, the basic meditative level to realize that I am not the soul, and then the limiting factor, to say, well, why did I take birth? What is my mission? And like the Serenity Prayer, form, like, Lord, grant me the power to accept the things that I can't change, and to change the things I remember offhand the exact wording, but to accept the things that I can't change, and the limiting factors that you're not going to solve the mysteries of the spiritual realm while we're in material form. So change the things that are directly related to our function right now, and then hopefully when we've passed our test, and the ultimate test of death, that will be on some sort of next level where we could worry about these deeper, more important questions. But there's plenty of purpose and questions that we could worry about, like quantum mind, photonic waveforms, better understanding of the neural correlates of consciousness, and mastering of the senses. Most importantly, living a moral, ethical life by taking control of ourself and developing this observer that observes ourself and then controls ourself and aligns ourself with correct behavior. So
I really like the way you worded that. That's so poetic.
Yeah,
Thank you for
I would
sharing that.
I would like to solve, so to say, the heart problem consciousness and all the greatest mysteries, but saying first and foremost, I would like to align myself with correct behavior. And say once I align myself with correct behavior, then I'll start worrying about answering the unanswerable questions. But if I can't even align myself with correct behavior, it's pretty unlikely to, impossible that I'm ever going to answer these questions. And in all likelihood, even if I could align myself with correct behavior, I'm still not going to be able to answer these questions. And that's why first become a Swami, first master your senses, and say, I never act basically off of my senses. I always act off a higher level consciousness, higher level rules, never directly based off of the senses. In that sense, I align myself with correct behavior, that no matter what signal my senses sent me, that the I that is not this body made sure that the body observed correct behavior. And then the mind itself. So not only the body, like speech.
So who's the best
thought,
Swami?
in action. Right, so correct behavior in terms of action and speech, and then even say correct behavior in terms of thought. That if I reach the level where I never did anything wrong, that I never even said anything wrong, I never even thought anything wrong.
you said wrong things to get people who said wrong things to speak less. But that's a whole other level of finesse, isn't it? Haven't got to that lesson yet.
Yeah, we got based retard here. Like, become the Goswami, master your senses, self-control.
Yeah. Thanks for the example of exactly what not to do. Thank you.
Well, I'm saying that, I mean, that not to say like, just a human acting human. But say like, no, align yourself with correct behavior. First, you have to recognize that, thank you, Rune, that there is such a thing as correct behavior, and that it's a worthwhile goal to align yourself with this correct behavior. And okay, there is things like duty, and that can include the 4Fs. There's a time for where duty will include fighting and fucking and fleeing and food, but that in the correct time and place according to the rules of proper behavior.
How does one access the rules of proper behavior?
Well, I mean, many methods. I mean, you study the scripture, study from the sages, meditation by access of the observer, trial and error, all of the above.
Yeah. How far along in that you think you are?
Very low. I'm saying, like, I mean, God forbid, like, I know myself better than anyone else, and like, no, God forbid, I'm very far from correct behavior, let alone correct speech and correct thought. And like I give the Talmudic example many times, like the Gemara says, at the end of the day, Messiah will come and will slaughter the evil impulse, and wicked people will see that they were, defeated by just a small grain of rice, that their evil impulse was tiny, and righteous people will see that they defeated mountains. And so like God forbid, the evil person that did a whole bunch of bad deeds just based off of simple revenge or sexual desire that they couldn't defeat, and the righteous person that you defeated huge amounts, the countless times where people wronged them and they didn't get anger, or the countless times where they could have done forbidden sexual deeds or taken forbidden profit and chose not to.
Woohoo!
That
We don't have to stop the show.
that will be
Sorry,
a substantial accomplishment, and say like, no, I mean, unfortunately, I know that I'm weak and that I fall victim to incorrect behavior constantly. Although I could take a reward, like said, like I haven't really been in a fight. I'm pretty good at avoiding conflict. I avoid immoral sexual behavior. I'm even reasonably well at even like semen retention. I'm careful at what I say. Like even like Norvin, I don't pick on people. I don't belittle people, even my enemies. I'm careful. Even in bad circumstances, I'm still pretty careful about the words that leave my mouth, let alone the action. And I'm also pretty careful about my thought. I don't indulge in negative thought. But like, no, as my own self observer, I know that I'm extremely far from correct behavior. God forbid. So maybe I'll take a break. You got memes there, unless you got something directly for me.
I was going to see if you had a chance to take a look at that thing with the bilayer graphene.
Well, I did look at that. That was like pure like material science. So it was like a little too much.
Well, that's why I sent it to you, because I know you go to
back.
like a lot of
Okay,
those
Doovid,
engineering
then
things.
you can have a.
Well, I don't have like a PhD in like non-organic chemistry or something like I like that stuff. But I mean, you're talking like pure material science. I even took a course on edX, like on just graphene, and but like I watched like half of it in 2-speed, and my mind was too cluttered to think about it because I had so much other stuff going on to focus on just like pure inorganic material science.
Yeah,
But I
just remember
appreciate
talking.
that. I'd like to have my mind uncluttered enough that I could concentrate just on pure like inorganic material science.
I had spoken to one of my chemical engineering friends like 10 years ago. We were cruising Wikipedia, and he'd been studying a lot about carbon nanotubes and buckyballs, and they were like, even like a decade, maybe even 15 years ago now. He's like, in theory, we might be able to do all these crazy things, and it's seeing a decade and a half go later, and all of a sudden it's like, well, all of a sudden we weren't expecting this, but we achieved superconductivity, and I'm like, it's very interesting. I just think it's fascinating, just with all the new technology and everything. And what you're doing is you're essentially taking like a 2D surface, just a layer of carbon atoms. You're taking another 2D surface, you're twisting it to right about a 1 degree angle to the point where, well, it's lining up as hexagons, and it just happens to have high temperature superconductivity properties. And I just think that's cool.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, that stuff's pretty important, like engineering and math and calculus are always subjects that I'd like to spend more time thinking about. But so the mind pretty cluttered, and a lot of times you're focusing on human relations, or I was doing the political debates or JQ debate, and so the I was preparing for that. I didn't have the concentration to think about abstract things, because it's even with the multiple truth hypothesis, it's very difficult. And what I was mentioning about basic meditation, you observe the mind. I could see the subconscious. Okay, like I'm still mad about all these things that didn't go the way I wanted, but I've subdued that to be able to use my mind to largely think about purely abstract topics.
Your mind was computationally bounded because you were dealing with other things at the time, so you didn't have your full concentration to really sit down and grasp what you were trying to grasp. No, I got you.
Well, I say it's somewhat meditation also, just to be able to think about math and science, that I've calmed my mind to where my mind is not consumed with thinking about material things, my ego, things that are directly related to me, but to use my mind to think about abstract topics.
I'm kind of the opposite. I use the math and science to help calm my mind, because otherwise I'll be going in all these different directions. I'll be getting worked up about whatever political thing it is there. I'm like, let me escape into science, and I kind of use it as my space. Just
okay. I've developed techniques to quiet my mind. So usually I could quiet my mind no matter the circumstance, and then I could try to direct my mind towards something given, based on the controller that thinks whatever I should occupy my mind with, or even God willing, with capacity to occupy my mind with multiple things at the same time. So if you haven't independently developed the ability to quiet your mind, then you could use math, science, abstract thought as a mind quieting technique. But I mean, meditatively, there's plenty of techniques to quiet the mind. And then once your mind is quiet, you willfully use your mind as you see fit, as opposed to, you're saying that you can't quiet your mind, so you use math and science as a technique to quiet your mind.
Also drugs.
Well, I was saying that you could work on basic meditative technique, even just breathing, watching your breath, slowing your breath. Even if you did like if you're athletic, you might even be able to get down to breathing just like once a minute, or if you focus, like breathe in, breathe out, deep breaths, and time it. So you're breathing like once every 15 seconds or something. Like most basic mind quieting techniques are like that, in breathing, counting your breath, or something like that. Or you could use music, or there's plenty mantras. There's a whole bunch of techniques to doing that. And I'm saying once your mind is quiet, you could actively control the resource of your mind. Like, now I'm going to use the full focus of my mind to think about this abstract topic like math or material science. And saying if your mind is occupied, and then you try to force your mind to focus on a given topic before quieting, it's probably not as productive as first quieting your mind and then focusing your mind. But at the same time, like, yes, you could use math and study as a meditative technique to quiet your mind. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, like that quieting your mind and then actively controlling your mind to the activity that you, the controller of your mind, wants to use your mind for.
Achieving the state without having to use anti-ciliatory things.
Well, if it's just something purely abstract, that I want to use my mind to think and understand so and so topic, and that may not even include like a therefore, for like a Freudian super ego. Like I'm going to think about material science so that I could reproduce better, so I could have better standing, or more material success, and find a better mate, or if from a Freudian term, but like even a Feynman, the joy of figuring things out. That I want to quiet my mind so I could think about something to figure it out for the pure joy of understanding and figuring something out. Or
Can I show you something
Doovid,
cool?
did you want to take a break? I'm back now.
okay, yeah. So I'll unplug. I'll be listening, but yeah, I'm gonna unplug for a second.
Awesome. I see you're presenting memes. Just give me a second. I guess you need the full. Oh my god, I'm so excited for whatever you're gonna do right now.
No. It was from what I had sent to Doovid the other day about these things, and I just think it's beautiful, just because at least with Thad's work, it's literally gotten me to get off my butt and start to play around with Wolfram Alpha. And it's just I don't know, I kind of treat it like a video game a little bit. I'm like, all right, what happens if I see this? And again, a lot of it's just numerology, but I'm like, I'm slowly starting to see how
Slow
the different
down. What do we mean by
manipulations-
numerology?
What you were criticizing me. Okay, I'm
Whoa.
looking to see where the pi root of pi fits in somewhere. And again, I realize most things that I might see are causal relationships, but I'm trying to understand how these manipulations, basically how utilizing spheres, rotation, circles, and basically spirals, a lot of things with pi and e, and just kind of trying to see their causal relations.
You're going in the wrong direction. So why is it a mistake for Thad to look at prime numbers versus periodic table? Same reason.
I mean, isn't it like the same thing?
The periodic table and prime numbers.
I
How many
don't know.
suppositions do you have to make before those are even remotely similar?
All I know is if his thing kind of follows the Riemann zeta function with the spirals, the thing that you printed however many years ago is basically a spiral. In basically.
Are you
whatever
talking about my
form it is.
old model of the PT?
Yeah, I mean, when you actually just flip it the other way, I'm like, oh, maybe it should have been more obvious. I don't know, because I'm looking, I'm like,
Aw.
these seem very similar. And if it comes down to like you end up having it in a grid format, so whether it's 45-degree angles, 90-degree angles, or something, I'm like, that's why I'm looking at it, I'm like,
Angles are emergent, dear. You got to get the causal order straight, and you'll get it all. And you got to realize that as your causal order comprehension accelerates, that you have to match it with humility due to how truly amazing the state of awareness is.
I get very excited. That's why I need to share it with other people that are very smart so they can say, you're not looking at anything, or maybe there is something to that. Let's explore further.
What I'm saying is follow your passions, but understand that our mind has a way of deceiving us and saying, do this thing, and it's a super great use of time, but it's actually not, and it feels good for maybe the wrong reasons, right? Like I'm just reminded on the Discord talking to someone who has a background in math is like, well, if what I said just doesn't make any sense, you just got to do some examples and you see what I mean. It's like, well, doing examples presupposing your conclusion doesn't necessarily, me memorizing a technique that isn't right, that I couldn't understand without basically practicing it a bunch of times, doesn't solve the problem of the not being able to a priori reason things out.
There's a difference between a parlor trick that seems to work and knowing what's actually going on. And I use the term numerology because I'm like, a lot of it might be, but
all I was looking for was what you meant, not to grill you on using the wrong definition, because I don't think there is such a thing. I just wanted to know what you meant by it.
Right. I was using the least charitable interpretation rather than saying, I'm doing the sciences. It's like, no, a lot of it's just playing around, but I'm also looking at some other models, and basically, I just think it's very interesting that one of the roots here, it's almost pi, it's 3.1416, and basically, I think what actually explains this is why I think it has the superconductivity here, is because is an electron like a spin half particle, and then if you get like the two derivative, isn't that how like the Cooper pairs or whatever would form? That in theory is how you get superconductivity. I have something completely else that I can go over if this really isn't your jam.
I'm not familiar enough with the material.
Okay,
Though I am
well,
interested.
let's
I
go to
just
this.
need, maybe if you could screen cap.
What the heck does this mean?
You could tell me exactly what's on the screen. I'll take a look at it, refamiliarize myself with Cooper pairs because I know I've heard of it. Back in the day, right?
It's basically ends up being a spin to an integer, which allows something about it flows better. The best way, like I conceptualize superconductivity, is like, all right, I don't necessarily know how electrons work, but I know how I work. And if I'm going around a very sharp corner or something, if I actually grab on, I can help use my own angular momentum because I've got a pivot point to speed around something. It's kind of like if you're going around like a pole or something like that, you're able to help conserve it rather than having to stop and utilize. That's something in my mind, but this is what I found more interesting, that if you used to study signals and everything, because I plugged in and I started kind of ripping off some of the hyperbolic vortex equation. But what I did was I did I to the I, and then I raised it to an X, and I put that all over pi.
Before you keep going, I'm fascinated,
Okay.
but real quick, does Thad's thing predict pi? I thought it predicted E.
I don't remember. He gets a lot of stuff out of it, and I'm you could probably go back the other way.
Are you feeling more confident as time goes on about his results or less? Because I looked him up on Google, which I suppose I should have done a while ago, but apparently he was arrested for stealing moon rocks. Like, it seems Bill Gates here. Odd. You heard of this?
This is why I say we live in the most fantastical universe. My
Did
thing
you
is,
know about this? I feel like a chump
Yeah.
here. I'm the only one who didn't Google this guy. I
No,
guess it's on me. It's on me.
Here's the thing. For my interview from Science, I also didn't want to necessarily, quote unquote, poison the well per se and be like, oh, this person, here's their history, because as far as I'm concerned, as far as the research goes, that has nothing to do with it. So it's like, if it's something,
It's evidence
maybe
in
I
the
should have
column of fame whore. And since I can't validate what he's done, even though it looks super awesome and I want it to be true, I'm not going to, forget that this is a consideration. To some extent, it's odd.
Okay.
Not saying it's a limiting factor.
Might that be a factor of why we don't see him on Oprah and stuff right now? Because he's been outside the institutional area for a number of years? Probably is.
All right, so what are we looking at with your diagram right now?
Okay, all right. So basically, I did this, and in this particular form is when it kind of comes up like this particular pattern here. And basically, it's just, again, it's got the real and imaginary parts. And again, this comes out to be, it's like I to the x, and then pi to the negative e to the x. And I'm just looking at this, and I don't know what to think. I just thought that, I'm like, okay, Jen, she studied signal processing and stuff. We're using two of the most used numbers along with their complex conjugates or something, I guess. I'm just saying, have you ever seen anything like this? Or is this just a fancy pattern that this happens to make?
Have I seen anything like it? I'm gonna make a commentary. Familiar with the Dirac delta? The issue with this Dirac delta is it's presupposing axioms I'm not entirely comfortable with, but you're familiar with the Schrodinger equation, yes?
That's the predicting wave function of basically the universe, or path integral, or whatever they call it.
Not sure if it's quite a path integral or just ODEs.
I'm thinking of the Feynman path integral. I'm confusing words, I'm sorry.
It reminds me of a bunch of them in sequence, but not quite. It also reminds me of very specific, what you might call, it reminds me of beats, but could it be beats?
I'm unfamiliar.
So basically, what you're saying is the blue ones are all above the axis, and the orange ones alternate above and below, so like a balance.
Oh, it is
between them.
doing that.
Yeah. So
Okay,
basically, what you
hold on.
have
Let
is
me
the
actually take the glass. I'm
integral
sorry.
of
This is
the integral of
Okay.
the blue one is close to the integral. Well, double the integral of the red one, or so there's appears to be a correspondence integral wise. I can't tell it just by looking at it, but they don't appear to be independent functions. What do you think?
Yeah. I just assuming that one is pi
What I'm
and
saying is the
one
real
is
and imaginary
e.
part
Yeah.
don't appear to be independent functions, and the point of I fundamentally is encoding this information that is not encodable in R, i.e., eigenvectors to rotation matrices.
That's why I'm thinking if it was actually, can I flex plot? I don't know if this will do anything. I had to put it in a very particular way before.
Oh yeah, now that MOP says looks like a hairpick memes, reminds me of a topology construct of a comb. I'm not sure if it
That's
had
kind of
the
what it
same
looks like a
type of
comb.
formal representation, but yeah, just generally it looks like.
Looks like the same
Are you
thing.
familiar with the Nyquist frequency?
No, it just. And again, I'm looking for things, and when I see, and again, I have no idea what that means. A definite integral of 0.06. I mean, it's not the fine structure constant, and it's not. It's just I'm not familiar with this. The only thing I could probably pick out is, okay, if we're doing 1/4 of that, again, if I'm going to assume that you have your base rotation of time, and then you have the 4 additional actions above that from the hyperbolic
Stop.
figure 8 knot, could
Stop.
that? Okay, yes, I'm reaching out. I'm grasping.
My brain is a effing potato, bro. I appreciate your genius. Nobody, perhaps more than me, does. Is that possible? But I honestly can't keep up with
mean,
certain
I
numbers.
thank you. I mean, again, it's just, this is why I brought this to you, just because I'm like, I don't know who else to like bring this to. I'm
I
like,
appreciate
this
that.
is the smartest person I know for signal processing. This looks like some form of a signal using base components that are very important in math and physics. And again, I get very excited about things, and I'm just like, I haven't seen the top thing. Okay, I can kind of see the bottom thing.
I have a question. Are you saying that this is a way to start with a waveform and get particle-esque behavior? Are you trying to fucking olive branch this shit?
I mean, that
coming in
sounds
Jesus?
good.
Just tell
I
me
mean,
if you're doing it right now, 'cause
I
I
was
will
just,
support it. I will support it,
I
but
was
tell me if that's
hoping.
what you're thinking right
I was
now.
hoping for a
need to know if
base
that's
wave
your
function.
plan.
No, this is my way of, when I said numerology before, I just look, when I take the pi root of pi and then like the e root of e, and then I divide them and everything, it's not one. It either depends on how you correlate them. It's either just below 1 or it's just 1, and I'm like, I'm trying to see the correlation between pi and e in their most rooted forms, and just trying to see if that's a way that maybe you could try to build up some fractal to help, trying to help. When you were talking about the fractals, and I'm like, it's looking more and more like if we were attempting to find the answer, basically, like what Doooovid was saying, in order to try to figure this out, you need to be an outside observer. I'm like, what if we were able to guess it? And it just modeled its way through. Again, it should be impossible, but I I was just looking for a waveform. My base intuition is this maybe a waveform? Could it lead to some form of particle? I mean, I'd just be happy with a waveform that made sense. I don't know.
Well, it's a very subtle thing. And have you looked at the hyperbolic apple and mushroom for any length of time?
Apple and like actual apples and mushrooms, or
So you haven't seen it yet.
no?
I guess you and I have sort of been lost in
I've been out for a little bit.
hyper abstract stuff. Hey, it's a good problem to have.
What am I looking for? Did I missed this from the presentation?
I think it may be the last blog post, but I can also pull it up and screen share it. Just have to find the image real quick.
Because I mean, an apple in and of itself, I mean, it's. I mean, I could kind of see that because I mean, it also kind of looks like a heart in a way.
Are you going to screen share again?
Oh, I mean, I don't have to. I thought you were going to bring up your thingy.
It's cool if the answer is yes. I was just going to decide
Oh
how
no,
I
no,
was
no!
going
I
to
wasn't.
change
I
the
wasn't planning on it right now. I just wanted to bring. What did you say it kind of looked like? I can always just listen back.
Are you able to look at what's on the screen?
Hold on. Let me close the other paper. Oh, let me go to the stream.
I'm going to move this over here. How much time have you spent thinking about the dimension, the geometry of the HF8 complement? Just approximately how much time have you been sort of lost in the thought about it?
Which part of it?
The shape, the geometry.
The twist.
Any attribute of its geometry, tell Kel.
Actively a number of hours, tangentially many more hours. I
bordering on embarrassed to admit publicly level of time.
Yes.
I like it. So you've got a pretty good notion of its geometry. So can you see what's on the screen now, or
this is your post.
So when we say waveform, so what kinds of waveforms? This is almost
the same as like the Nonatron, except you actually have like the full like generations.
I have no clue what that means, but thank you so much, Dragon Ken.
Oh,
I honor your identity. Hyperbolic apples are a descending pump, and they're representative of they're the sort of anecdotal evidence of the waveform principle. So what's the waveform? Well, again, it's a matter of some debate, sort of what Duke and I were talking about before. Is it really physical or not physical? Whatever is the animating principle, blah, blah, blah. The point is that it isn't, the material that is the animating principle. It's something else. And so the idea is you go from the pure form shape, which is rendered there, and then you can deform it topologically to get to the apple shape. And I think is it obvious how that works? Like it fills in obviously in the center. There's a crystal that fills in the volume between the outer and inner perimeters.
It's the tasty part.
And I'm calling that a crystal.
I mean, you're right. It's a tasty crystal.
It's a very tasty crystal, and I also have a mushroom one. I can't believe you haven't seen this. Have you seen this or not?
I think we had a brief discussion about it, maybe off air at one point, because I do kind of remember you mentioning some of the fruit things, because like this seems a little bit familiar. The mushroom, not so much.
Okay, then I'm gonna get it. Seems like you've really been pursuing this other thing. But yeah, I want to come back to what you originally wanted to talk about after this. Here's what I've got for you so far with regards to where you're going on your project before we go into my thing.
Right.
4 basic concepts that we have no idea whether we're talking about the same information, because everything reduces down to information, right? Like you were saying numerology before, I would say that term is a bit vague. So talk about, these various, whatever you want to call them, manifestations of 3 plus 1. The Collatz conjecture. Have you looked into that much?
I have no idea what that is. I feel like somebody mentioned that in some lecture I probably listened to, but that wasn't one of the things that I looked up. Okay. I kind of remember when you were.
1.
Okay.
So we got Collatz conjecture, HF8 complement observables, which is Thad's thing, which, asterisk moon rocks guy. Don't tie your reputation to this guy. The HF8 complement is still the 3 plus 1 dimensional to get the same information out of the periodic table, or a very similar style of information. The question is whether those 4 different things, are they actually different things or representatives, particular representations of the same fundamental information underneath them even more still. So that's the part where if there is something more fundamental, it's possible there's like infinity different ways that are all different to some measure of expressing the same fundamental truth. So what you're looking at right now you want to find the measurement limit in the way you're looking at the universe right now. Like through math, you understand how there's sort of theoretically infinity ways we could cut the universe up, chunk it. Hope I didn't lose you there.
I think Professor Wolfram said there were approximately like 50,000 ways to redo math. But then again, that was from a video like 8 years ago. You can express things in an infinite number of ways. I tend to think a lot of the observations we have on the different scales are ultimately come down to just orders of magnitude difference, because I keep looking at different things, and again, I don't know how it works, but
Listen,
if
the
you're
measurement limit transcends dimensionality. No, maybe we should say scale instead of dimensionality. Measurement limit transcends scale. How about that?
Okay.
Because you're looking at the principle that is true in both, which is geodesics exist. And that there's a different geodesic per energetic band. And what are the geodesics? There's the 3 plus 1, the 3, the 2, and the 1. Circle, line, etc. Anyway, can you see the mushroom beside the apple?
Yes, I could see. It's just the wave function itself, and it's coming about in a particular fashion. I do remember seeing that picture there as well. I mean, my base function, just as far as I know, is if we're existing in some form of, I think a lot of it really, I think field theory just kind of does this. It's just however you
Memes, you're asking
however you
what's the
cook or
waveform.
flavor
I'm
it.
telling you what the waveform is. What's the waveform
Okay.
here? What is it?
It's a hyperbolic figure 8 knots complement.
Well, which aspect of it? The deformed aspect or the undeformed aspect?
What do you
The
mean by
waveform
that?
is the deformed aspect. It is that which undergoes waveform reduction. The pure form does not undergo waveform reduction. It is the ground of waveform reduction. Don't throw garbage at me. Not you.
I feel it's the internal action that just somehow is being projected into what is looking more and more kind of like our holographic observable universe. How
You
exactly
asked me
that's
what the waveform is. So
what is
the
the
metaphor
waveform?
I've been using for waveform is I've been saying a sphere is animating the sun. But that's
Okay.
so simple that it's trivially simple. Nobody gets it. They're just like, you're a kook, just say monad one more time, motherfucker, type shit.
You gotta
These roads,
drill
it
it in.
do be like that though. Okay. Anyway, so it's like very obvious to my mind. It's too simple. I understand. Way too simple. So this one, the 3 plus 1, is less deniable because it's a shape. So it makes the sun one perhaps more obvious now, how there's a sphere form animating the sun, but the sun's not a perfect sphere. And there is no such thing as a perfect sphere that in the sense of it being observable, but there is such a thing as a perfect sphere in the sense of it being a shape that predicts what the shapes in the material realm will be, aka observable realm. So that's your basic waveform. So every waveform is going to be 1, 2, 3, or 3 plus 1D. And remember, they're entangled to some measure, and they're also state specific, right? Which is where you have to get to the idea of a machine. So this is a machine, right? Because what's it doing? It's fundamentally a pump. Right, so you have this theorem we can extrapolate to say that the complement of a knot is a pump under certain circumstances or what have you, right? So there may be better geodesics because there is. I don't even know. Like, this is how bad I am at this stuff. Like, I don't even know if there's a class of geodesics or if it's just a unique geodesic that we're talking about with this thing. So yay, doors still open for other people to figure shit out in this, which is always nice.
You start looking at some of this stuff, and you start looking at how some of the other stuff works, and even that thing that I had sent to Doovid and stuff, the way they start modeling it is with, guess what? Tetrahedra. And the way they actually do it, it kind of reminds me of some of the Penrose tilings in that they have different size. Like you'd have a primary one, because they were talking about something, I think like flows of superfluid or something like that, and trying to be able to kind of figure things out and kind of see how they're going to go. Maybe it was Reed flows, maybe that was another video. But essentially, off of the primary tetrahedra, they would have additional tetrahedra, 4 additional tetrahedra at each of the vertices. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, again, different size. 4 of them are the same size. One is different, but I'm like, oh, 5 tetrahedra compose an icosahedron. Just happens to be a 20-sided die in Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm just like, oh, I just think that's interesting. And again, that's a little bit of a trolly thing there, but I keep on seeing these structures coming up. And then even something that I looked at before, I was listening to a Wolfram stream several months ago, and I was trying to lead somebody else to information without telling them the information. So I'm like, oh, just look up the lowest 3 or the lowest volume 3 manifold that's balanced or something. And I was actually typing into Google to make sure it was actually that, and then I came across the Weeks manifold, and I'm like, Weeks manifold has a volume of like 0.94, and I'm like, what the heck is even going on there? But I
Maybe
think
that
that's
would be
only
a
under
good goal for you, is to
isometry.
try to reason through the process of deriving pi from one of these knots based on an actual strategic understanding of the emergence of space-time in this entangled modality.
That sounds very hard.
You got anything else going on?
I lifting things up and putting them down.
I was laughing at what's in the chat. There's a request that you say a word. Let me see here.
Oh no.
Sorry.
What have I done now? What's going on? Pulse 4? Was that it? Snake. Hold on. What am I looking at?
It's not bad.
Uh,
Moral Outrage Prophet wants you to say polyploid.
Polyploid memes.
Say polyploidal homology one more time, motherfucker. One more damn time. The point.
I feel like that's some lore that I've missed. I apologize.
It's from Pulp Fiction.
Oh.
The pump can
terrible.
be along the can go with or against gravity, and when it's going against gravity, the crystal's on top, like with the mushroom, and when it's going with gravity, the crystal is inside the chamber.
Isn't that kind of the motion of a Bose-Einsteinian condensate or something? If you get like
Well,
maybe
whatever
something
it
within the
is,
magnetic field.
the way our friend describes it is as a hyperfluid, I want to say. That basically all the
Superfluid. I propose the hyperfluid would be
Oh my god,
further
it's
inside.
hyperbolic geometry and superfluid. All these words, like I feel like an Astro Boy here.
What?
Right,
Astro
fine.
Boy's a
Hyperfluid.
hero. You can do this. Well, here's and Jen. Here's the thing. I'm gonna white Dragonite for Thad a little bit there. Learning whatever you learn there, does that take away from the work, or is that just something you happen to keep in the back of your mind and realize some folks might bring that up? See, my thing is, and the reason why I kind of came to this is I was asked on one of the Eric Weinstein Discords before, because several of the people there responded to Dr. Weinstein's paper they came out with, and they gave a bit of a rebuttal, or at least prior to his paper and everything. I think Sabine Hossenfelder, she shared it out. Not that that necessarily has anything to do with it, but Dr. Weinstein's one criticism, he's like, well, one of them used their name and the other did not. And I remember being asked on that same Discord, okay, would this particular person's work, the work that they physically did, have any less meaning if they happen to be anonymous? Now, you could make an argument for that, but if their work speaks for themselves, if they're doing good work, should that necessarily take away? And just, again, I also put myself in, if I happen to be in that position and I'm like, all right, when I was 23 years old, I did some dumb things. I do dumb things every day. I just happen to be lucky and not necessarily get caught for the dumb things that I've done in my past. So it's also one of those things I try to keep in perspective. And again, am I biased? Totally. If I'm to be one of the first people to kind of come across this thing the day before they came up with a mu on G2 results, and it predicts the mu on G2 results, that's going to have a bit of a significant factor in me wanting it to also be right. But I also keep on hearing different things from all these other universities, and it sounds like they're talking about very similar things. So I'm trying to weigh this all out as well. And he's also been very nice to me. I'm sorry for my rant.
I'm just saying that shouldn't necessarily count for anything. But appreciate you. I don't want to,
Well, my thing is,
if
if someone's going to crap on you, it's like, okay, listen, I don't control everything Jen does, but as far as I've seen, it's like, as far as trying to understand how we kind of got to where we are, it's like, it literally generates from let there be light. I'm like, I haven't seen a better explanation. Just unless I want to go from just straight exactly what Scripture says. But as far as I can see, that's an easier way to describe it at the time when you don't have like modern science and thousands of years of like notation and biology records and stuff. That's all.
Yeah, because that's helped us out so much.
I think unfortunately money guides us in a lot of directions that can be useful, and other times are just perpetuating themselves.
I'm not sure if I'm right about the Galatz conjecture. It hasn't been established, really proven or anything, why it's a thing, or that it's even a thing. Did you look it up at all, or no?
I don't even know how to spell Galatz conjecture. Oh, Galatz, it's with a C. All right. Is this? Let me share this. Where are we? All right. Is this? Oh, is this something like avalanche or? Oh, okay. It says everything positive turn is obtained from the previous term is false. From turn is even. The next term is 1/2 the previous term. If the previous term is odd, the term is 3 times the previous term plus 1. The conjectures don't matter what the end of the sequence will always reach 1. Named after Lothar Galatz. It's the problem 2 years after receiving his doctorate, also known as a 3 + 1.
So what are we
problem.
modeling with if Galatz conjecture is dependent upon the measurement limit? What is the Galatz conjecture modeling? Think about that.
I mean, does this just, is this science pointing towards God? Because if it's always going to reach 1,
You keep saying that, but to me
God is
that
the
question's
one.
nonsensical because I can't conceive of non-godness. So I have a slight,
Okay.
you know,
No, I'm
hesitation.
I'm trying to steel man it from a secular perspective, because I tend to be of this mind now myself. Just because the more and more I see, the more and more I'm like, feeling very small. You
I
also
think
offered
Gandalf talked about
$500
that
for
at
this solution.
one point. The feeling small can be really good because it makes you realize how big the universe is. Like, how else are you supposed to, don't you want to perceive something really, really fucking huge? Sometimes the only way to do that is to feel relatively small. Not a permanent state.
Why does this look like some of the Wolfram stuff? Oh no.
To me, the infinitely big state, like being super far, that's a bit spooky. I don't know why.
Oh, that is
The
interesting.
reason I keep bringing it back to stuff like this and the Nyquist theorem is that these things are steeped in precedents, recognizable patterns. I don't exactly know the connection of Brownian motion, but is there any mention of Brownian motion in that page? I don't know if you happen to see it.
It's not coming up.
Sorry if this is asking too much, but yeah, it's
No.
an ongoing problem. So it doesn't look like they have a solution. So basically, a prediction of measurement limit would be that there is no solution because this is the fundamental information in the universe. At least it's the most fundamental. I'm not saying there couldn't be something more fundamental than measurement limit, but as yet to be discovered.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if it's true. I mean, I'm looking at
Don't
it.
you
I'm
realize
like, all right.
that this isn't about truth? This is about different models to different frames to see reality through. What's truth in that? It's meaningless. It's just us blobs looking at other blobs with hyperfine detail. I'm a really bad salesperson, aren't I?
Yeah. Yeah, in some way. Yeah. No. Well, here's the thing. Any type of character design, you got to have some balance there. So you can be brilliant in so many ways, and then just this is I bring this up in not to get political, which everyone always says before they get a little political. This is my biggest criticism. A lot of my friends on the left, it's in general, a lot of them are just very bad salespeople, and that's the thing. And some of the things that they say, it just kind of like makes me want to face palm. I'm like, I tend to think that a lot of those things there can be really well, but the way it gets presented just, oh, it bothers me. I mean, I spent a lot of time as a salesperson. The problem, I don't like having to try to use charisma or some little over the top thing to really push something unless it's really a core thing or anything, because I feel like you just have so much wazam shabang and everything, and you're just using over the top things that just appeal to emotion. And you know what? That's okay doing that once in a while, but I think you want to just try to have the most solid foundation you can. That's why a lot of times I kind of play around in a fun-natured manner to see if there's actually something going on. Then just take it from there.
Well, what do we know so far? We know the periodic table contains 3 plus 1 in a dualistic fashion, which is entangled, which totals 118 microstates. We know that. That's some form of 3 plus 1. And then we have a strong evidence with Thad's thing. And then we have the hyperbolic mushrooms, which is not independent from Thad's thing, but I suppose it's evidence in support of his thing meaning something. Then the Collatz conjecture, and the fact that we experience 3 plus 1 through dualism, aka 2 eyes. That fact also being the measurement limit. So that's 4 different things. So maybe
I'm going to call it a night. So you guys want to carry on? I'll try to check out what you were talking about tomorrow. Have a great week and blessings.
Cool. I do it.
Wait a minute. Didn't you have something you want to ask Doovid? Sorry.
Oh no, he's retiring for the evening. It's all right. I gotta hit the hay. And
So I'm a good businessman. I got to wrap up some of the
he's
books I sold
a
so I could
wise
ship
man.
them out first thing tomorrow morning.
Thanks for being here all this time, 3 hours. Appreciate it. And I guess the questions will wait till next time, Memes, and appreciate you coming on too.
Okay. Well, if they're important, you could, Twitter them or whatever. You could message me on Twitter. Or I'll watch back. I was listening a little bit in the background, and I'll watch back tomorrow.
Cool.
So you're
okay. Have a great week, everyone.
You too, Doof.
You too. Peace
so what
out.
are you looking at? What type of route?
I just, again, playing around, because as I think Professor Sean Carroll said, if you don't necessarily know what's going on, try squaring it. Try taking the square root or cubing it or something. And
Even though a square has parallel lines, which don't exist.
Well, the root,
Let's
not
look at
not
the
square.
precedent for parallel lines in the real world. We have math not really doing anything viable since calculus until the hyperbolic axiom was embraced versus the Euclidean parallel lines gambit. Don't you understand? A square root presupposes Euclidean.
Is that gamma?
Do you understand what I'm saying? A square root presupposes a square.
Oh, does it?
Well, let's.
I thought it was just that by itself. Well, that would. Okay, that doesn't necessarily make it prime.
It's not about primeness. What is the obsession? I don't understand. I don't even think I've ever thought about prime numbers any time other than someone bringing it up to me. What's this obsession with prime numbers?
I thought
it's the idea of the object associated. It's the object associated with it. What are you presupposing to carry out that calculation? You're presupposing the geometry of a square is well defined. Show me a square in our friend Hyperbolic Bob.
What?
Well, if the only thing that exists technically is Hyperbolic Bob, because everything else is derivative of Hyperbolic Bob, well then where's the square in relation to that? Because if that's the only thing that exists, well, squares don't exist unless you can show me how you can get a square out of that.
It's at the end of the book.
What do you mean at the end of the book?
It's in where like there's much more like detailed notation and stuff. And
it's even easier than that. You take a circle, you can get a square from a circle. Question is, how many steps does it take?
You gotta swap, basically you just gotta curve the angles.
That's not any type of answer. We're looking for a step-by-step.
Oh, the actual, how do we actually how do we figure out the pi thingy? Okay, all right.
Not about pi.
I don't know.
We're just still at the level of playing with axioms and geometry and what are we actually doing when we're doing these treatises. And even a simple operation like a square root, that there's an embedded manner of thinking, which is problematic because the order of emergence of geometry is highly relevant to interpreting everything, type of a
And you just
field
explained
equations.
why Professor Wolfram is going into the whole meta mathematics thing. Because at least occasionally in his voice, I hear like, do I have to rebuild all of Mathematica to make it as accurate to actual what's going
All
on
you
as
have to
we
do
do?
is be patient with yourself, believe in yourself, say, I can understand this because there's a million, maybe there's infinity ways that this thing is true, but I'm entitled to understand at least one, maybe even more than one, and that's great. Even if there's infinity. It's actually even better if there are infinity ways that this is true, because then you never get bored of reincarnating. I think that's a real concern, but it shouldn't be because
I mean,
what do you
I
feel
generally
with
just
these
I
fucking
generally
numbers,
just
man?
try to say that, well, try to at least maximize my karma from whatever point I can and see how much I can figure out in a given lifetime.
I say just leave the door open. You don't want to overestimate or underestimate, and rather just accept that you don't know. It's awesome.
Mm.
But I really wanted to see where this goes, this idea about this measurement limit being manifest over multiple not scales, quote
Yeah,
unquote
well,
coordinate
see,
systems.
the wording makes a difference. The wording makes such a big difference because it's
I know I said dimensionality before instead of scale. That was a terrible, terrible error. I feel absolutely gutted for that.
your correction of me using black holes and singularities with it. All I know is you corrected me, and all of a sudden, in about a month or so, just even after thinking about it, I'm like, all right, that's a fair point, and I'm like, oh God, she was right. Thank you. I'm just trying to see what the value. I remember gamma being like 5.72 or something like that. I think that's. Why don't I?
Is there a
Okay.
route that makes sense to take?
And again, this is why I call it numerology, because I'll do things. Maybe they do something, and
Yes.
if I see a similar value, I'm like, okay, even if I come up with the exact value or something within that value, does it even make any sense, or is that just like just a, it just happens to be a coincidence, which can totally be the case.
That's why it's tricky. You can spend so long chasing a ghost and it just doesn't actually lead anywhere. Because as it stands, how would you prove, quote unquote, the collapse conjecture if it's equivalent to the measurement limit? Or if it's derivative, if it's first order derivative of the measurement limit, you couldn't deduce it without the measurement limit or something more fundamental than the measurement limit, which is really, is it conceivable that there could be something more fundamental than 3 plus 1? Because I don't know.
I mean, that's what we observe, but I'm thinking more and more, whatever it is ends up being some holographic entanglement of whatever fractal
That
thingamabobber it
precipitates
is.
on 3 plus 1. The geodesics and associate geodesics and next to geodesics and on and on and on. It's all the resonant harmonics about the monad in nested sheets.
That's why I'm trying to figure out how it might work. Just because in the back of my head, I'm like, are we really just some 3 plus 1 dimensional like TV
You can think of
screen
it as a
or something?
simulation. Listen, you can think of it as a simulation
Seeming.
only within this very rigid, narrow interpretation. That's why I'm always saying to people, don't think of it as a simulation, because you're going to presuppose your garbage about a simulation, because it really is one, but you got to understand why it's one, go through the process of reasoning. Then you see, oh, okay, I recognize that object, quote unquote, or my little insight is that object as something that we could say is hologram, projection, simulation. All in all, we want to convey the idea of orderedness via superposition, via Heisenberg uncertainty, because that gives you a precedent for very simple interference pattern. which is then more and more and more and more complicated. That's obviously a metaphor because that is only 2-dimensional, whereas what we're dealing with is 3 to 3 plus 1 dimensional, right? Whether it's 3 or 3 plus 1 dimensional, all about energetic density because it's banding between the geodesics. It's possible sometimes that the acting geodesic is a point because we have a well-defined center of mass for sufficiently large objects. Anyway, I don't want to lose anybody here. I don't know if what I'm saying makes any sense, and I'm getting motion sickness looking at what you're looking at here.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm just looking through. I probably should have just done like 5.7. Okay, it's not there. All right.
Was that of any assistance whatsoever?
Yeah, I mean, it made me happy because I was able to rule that out as actually being anything that I could see. This is I tend to think whatever ends up being the truth, however you model the things, you're going to have to make predictions that basically end up at a focal point, kind of like a vortex there. And you know what? If you end up having an idea, okay, this idea is not correct. All right, that's outside the bounds of the vortex of knowledge. That's why I'm like, all right, well, everything has some value. You
This
probably want
isn't
to try to
knowledge.
maximize it.
This isn't knowledge.
Well, we know
really.
it's not knowledge.
It's on the way to knowledge. It's virtuous learning aids, but I wouldn't strictly call it knowledge because I want to have a super high standard for what that is.
I also
That's
try
all
to
I'm saying.
occasionally
Like
look at some of the
mathematical,
things
maybe
in
we can
there.
say like mathematical, I don't know, math knowledge, I guess, very loosely defined. I just don't want to cheapen the term, sorry.
I just also try to glean a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So if I see it in another state, I might not necessarily know exactly what's going on, but maybe there was a little bit of a chunk somewhere where it's like, okay, I have this little bit of a kernel. Let me look back into this because I've occasionally gone back to some things at times recommended by the algorithm to me, and I'll listen to it again. I'll be like, okay, I listened to this before, but now I know it's kind of like rereading something after you learn a little bit of something else. So that's all I got. I gotta hit the hay, but thank you for having me on. I always love chit-chatting about this, and I
It's
definitely
really
want to
nice to see that you're moving forward and you're understanding, and I look forward to the next time we can chit-chat about what we're all discovering together, and hope this is an inspiration for the people watching. I mean, just before you go, do you have any special background in physics or math?
What? No. Well, I took a modern physics class for all of, I think, like a week and a half, 2 weeks in college. And I realized, I'm supposed to take physics 1 through 3, thermodynamics, electromagnetism, and everything. I was able to start doing some of the homework, but I had to take, like, exploring the universe or something as a core class for business. And they were on different campuses.
What would you say to someone who's maybe a little interested but intimidated by the fact that it's physics?
Just give it a shot. This is the thing. It's like, it's not back in the day where it's like, all right, you have a pencil, you have a paper, maybe you have an elementary computer, you have to write out this fancy equation, make sure it's as right as you can see, and then plot it all on a card, feed in the card, feed in the card, feed in the card. When you have your time allotted at whatever university it is, dude, we've got things like Wolfram Alpha now, and we have all these different videos and stuff that start off in just even a basic format. Like literally there's like an entire freaking like quantum physics course or something like that, and just all these different videos and stuff that you can just start learning at your own pace. You can take a full course. I mean, I personally think that most knowledge should tend to be free. Professionalized training, okay, yeah, people are spending the time, ain't nothing wrong with that. But I also like the public funding model as well. Ain't nothing wrong with utilizing a PBS thing. Is like if you're finding value, you support folks that are value. Again, I'm getting off into different things, but just give it a shot. Just reach out to some folks, because if knowing is half the battle, the other half is showing up, and that adds up to 100%. So if you're willing to show up to at least learn, guess what? You can start to know some things. Can you know everything? No. I mean, we're computationally bounded. We only exist for just a fraction in this universe of stuff and things, at least in this current form. I just say try to do the best you can and just reach out to different folks. Some folks maybe you won't hear from, but you never know. The question never asked, probably not going to get an answer for it. So that's all I got.
Thanks so much for your contribution. We'll talk to you real soon. Good night.
All right. Peace out, Jen. We'll see you all later.
Peace out. Thanks all. Oh yeah, and I remember there's a question of Victoria's like, how do I reconcile Jen from the teach server? It's like the teach server is you know, a place for people to debate. The expectation is a certain level of hostility, perhaps. I don't like to be hostile, but if I have to be, I want to get it out of the way and then just resume a pleasant discussion, which certain people in certain places make that hard to do. And then talking to Doovid, there shouldn't be any trouble reconciling that. It's the same person that enjoys certain pursuits. But what I'm doing here is more a job type thing than indulging my own preferences. Demonstration of a certain standard of academic achievement. So I appreciate everybody, whatever extent they're open, giving that a shot. Till next time. Thanks for tuning in. Looks like I'm having trouble finding my outro song. Oh, there we go.
That's just so to say, a worthless opinion of.
It's so important that she can't be told, she won't be told that it's wrong. And
bringing it back to Church of Entropy and her attack dog Gandalf the White.
Why don't you learn to shut up and fuck your goddamn logic?
they control the media, and the media is capable of making the people believe in anything.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, we've had these streams, and I've been doing with Church of Entropy, and she's been bringing on new people, and like we did those streams on like stream etiquette. We walked through like the technology.
I have like very strongly negative opinions of the kind of Brundle clique.
Is she trying to garner herself cult prestige by associating